Because of you, there's a giant in our midst, and my wife is dead!
Understanding that the church is a learning laboratory helps us to prepare for an inevitable reality. In some way and at some time, someone in this church will do or say something that could be considered offensive.
First, I want to change the question. There are no homosexual members of the church.
But it isn't my fault. I was given those beans. You persuaded me to trade away my cow for beans. And without those beans, there had been no stock to get up to the giants in the first place.
Such an event will surely happen to each and every one of us, and it certainly will occur more than once. Though people may not intend to injure or offend us, they nonetheless can be inconsiderate and tactless.
There are no homosexual members of the church.
Wait a minute, magic beans for a cow so old that you had to tell a lie to sell it, which you told. Were they worthless beans? Were they oversold? Oh, until us who persuaded you to steal that gold?
See, it's your fault.
No.
So it's your fault?
No.
Yes, it is.
It's not.
It's true!
Wait a minute.
You and I cannot control the intentions or the behavior of other people. However, we do determine how we will act.
No, I only stole the gold to get my cow back from you.
So it's your fault.
Yes.
No, it isn't. I'd have kept those beans, but our house was cursed. She made us get the cow to get the curse reversed.
It's your father's fault that the curse got placed and the place got cursed in the first place.
Oh, then it's his fault.
So-
It was his fault.
No.
Yes, it is. It's his.
I guess.
Wait a minute.
Please remember that you and I are agents endowed with moral agency.
When people all share values, when people all share morals,
Moral agency.
they become a team. And once you engage the psychology of teams, it shuts down open-minded thinking.
So it's your fault!
Wait a minute. If you hadn't done it
Right,
before,
it's your fault.
She's the one who it's your fault.
This is Infants on Thrones, the philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Quorum.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Osland, and in case you missed it, that last clip that you heard there was Jonathan Haidt saying basically that shared morals make you a team. And when you become a team, you essentially shut down open-minded thinking. Now, another way of saying this is that shared morality binds and blinds.
it's your fault.
See, it's her fault. And it isn't mine at all.
But what?
Which might help shed some light on the Bednar quotes that I juxtaposed against the song Your Fault from the musical Into the Woods, because I don't actually disagree with what Bednar has to say about choosing to be offended, or at least in choosing to stay offended. But of course, he does things and says things that offend my sensibilities all the time, and then I make fun of him for it, and, I think that's all because Bednar and I no longer share the same moral framework, and so I've had a tendency of thinking that means that I'm moral and he's amoral, or that I'm morally superior and he's morally inferior, but now I'm questioning all that. I don't know if that's really the case, even though it sure feels that way sometimes. So I think maybe we're just focused on different moral standards, and that's something that I want to explore more in general, but especially in today's episode, and I want to do it in a way that I don't know that we've ever really done anything quite like this on Infants on Thrones. So first, I'm going to walk you through a TED Talk from 2008, where Jonathan Haidt talks about the moral roots of conservatives and liberals. And no, this isn't going to be a political episode, but I wanted to start with this framework that I'll then use in the second part of the episode, because today I listened to the episode that Bod put together with his sister, the interview where they were talking about their reactions to the bishop's talk at their grandma Dorothy's funeral. And I understand why the bishops talk about girls' camp and Skittles, things that didn't have anything to do with their non-Mormon deceased grandma Dorothy's life, why that was offensive to them. But I've also been drinking this Jonathan Haidt Kool-Aid, which makes me stop and question, why am I seeing things the way that I'm seeing, and why is it that good moral people can be so divided in the areas of religion and politics? Is it that this bishop was really a horrible person? Anyway, rather than picking Bob and Kat's story apart with this new framework that I'm experimenting with and still seeing how does this really work, is this something I actually want to adopt or not, I thought about my own family and a discussion that we recorded and released with John Dehlin for Mormon Stories 7 years ago. So that's going to be my focus. So what I want to do is kind of like a Froback Friday type episode where I put my own family that I grew up with under the microscope, and I test these moral framework ideas from Jonathan Haidt to see if I can gain any greater understanding of these insights or of my family. And hopefully this will be interesting and thought-provoking for you to listen to as well as I'm trying to figure this out on my own. But I want to be very clear that I don't feel like I've got all the answers and I'm going to be lecturing you guys and telling you, here's all the answers. It may come across that way at some point, but I'm just trying to figure this stuff out on my own. So let's get to it. And imagine that you're sitting in a large auditorium and Jonathan Haidt is standing on the stage in front of you and he's showing you a picture of the statue of David, which, if you didn't know, is the statue of a naked man.
I'd like to start with a riddle for you. Suppose that two American friends are traveling together in Italy. They go to see Michelangelo's David, and when they finally come face to face with the statue, they both freeze dead in their tracks. The first guy, we'll call him Adam, is transfixed by the beauty of the perfect human form. The second guy, we'll call him Bill, is transfixed by embarrassment at staring at the thing there in the center.
Penis. He's pointing to the statue's penis. Sorry, Mom. I'll go wash out my mouth with soap.
So here's my question for you. Which one of these two guys was more likely to have voted for George Bush, which for Al Gore? I don't need to show of hands because we all have the same political stereotypes. We all know that it's Bill. And in this case, the stereotype corresponds to a reality. It really is a fact that liberals are much higher than conservatives on a major personality trait called openness to experience. People who are high on openness to experience just crave novelty, variety, diversity, new ideas, travel. People low on it like things that are familiar, that are safe and dependable. If you know about this trait, you can understand a lot of puzzles about human behavior. You can understand why artists are so different from accountants. You can understand why you can actually predict what kinds of books they like to read, what kinds of places they like to travel to, and what kinds of food they like to eat. Once you understand this trait, you can understand why anybody would eat at Applebee's, but not anybody that you know. This trait also tells us a lot about politics. The main researcher of this trait, Robert McCrae, says that open individuals have an affinity for liberal, progressive, left-wing political views. They like a society which is open and changing. Whereas closed individuals prefer conservative, traditional, right-wing views.
Haidt then asks the audience to raise their hands if they're liberal or conservative or libertarian, and concludes that the audience is mostly liberal, which he sees as a bit of a problem.
This is a bit of a problem. Because if our goal is to understand the world, to seek a deeper understanding of the world, our general lack of moral diversity here is going to make it harder. Because when people all share values, when people all share morals, they become a team. And once you engage the psychology of teams, it shuts down open-minded thinking.
It's your fault.
See, it's her fault, and it isn't mine at all.
But what?
When the liberal team loses, we comfort ourselves. We try to explain why half of America voted for the other team. We think they must be blinded by religion or by simple stupidity. So if you think that half of America votes Republican because they are blinded in this way, then my message to you is that you're trapped in a moral matrix, in a particular moral matrix. And by the matrix, I mean literally the matrix, like the movie The Matrix. But I'm here today to give you a choice. You can either take the blue pill and stick to your comforting delusions, or you can take the red pill, learn some moral psychology, and step outside the moral matrix. Now, because I know... Let's start at the beginning. What is morality and where does it come from?
So let's think about Bob and his sister at their grandma's funeral. And I know I said I wasn't going to pick this apart, and I'm really not going to. I'm going to focus more on my family coming up. But let's go back to Bob and his sister for a second. If you listen to that podcast and you know the story that we're talking about, what was the moral violation that the bishop committed that was so offensive to Bob and his sister? Was the bishop harming anyone with his remarks? Was he not being fair to the memory of Grandma Dorothy and the values that she lived her life by, which were not Mormon plan of salvation values? Was this a lack of loyalty in some sense, where Bob and Kat maybe felt that their in-group family loyalty was steamrolled by a larger loyalty to the Mormon church? where it should have been directed to their own family? I don't know. But ask yourselves these questions as you listen to Jonathan Haidt talk about the 5 foundations of morality, which he believes come pre-programmed into our brains from birth. A first draft of moral framework that changes and develops over time.
The worst idea in all of psychology is the idea that the mind is a blank slate at birth. Developmental psychology has shown that kids come into the world already knowing so much about the physical and social worlds and programmed to make it really easy for them to learn certain things and hard to learn others. The best definition of innateness I've ever seen, this just clarifies so many things for me, is from the brain scientist Gary Marcus. He says, the initial organization of the brain does not depend that much on experience. Nature provides a first draft, which experience then revises. Built-in doesn't mean unmalleable. It means organized in advance of experience. Okay, so what's on the first draft of the moral mind? To find out, my colleague Craig Joseph and I read through the literature on anthropology, on cultural variation and morality, and also on evolutionary psychology, looking for matches. What are the sorts of things that people talk about across disciplines, that you find across cultures, and even across species? We found five best matches, which we call the 5 foundations of morality. The first one is harm-care. We're all mammals here. We all have a lot of neural and hormonal programming that makes us really bond with others, care for others, feel compassion for others, especially the weak and vulnerable, gives us very strong feelings about those who cause harm. The second foundation is fairness, reciprocity. There's actually ambiguous evidence as to whether you find reciprocity in other animals, but the evidence for people could not be clearer. Third foundation is in-group loyalty. You do find groups in the animal kingdom, you do find cooperative groups, but these groups are always either very small or they're all siblings. It's only among humans that you find very large groups of people who are able to cooperate, join together into groups, but in this case, groups that are united to fight other groups. This probably comes from our long history of tribal living, of tribal psychology. And this tribal psychology is so deeply pleasurable that even when we don't have tribes, we go ahead and make them because it's fun. Sports is to war as pornography is to sex. We get to exercise some ancient drives. The fourth foundation is authority respect. Authority in humans is not so closely based on power and brutality as it is in other primates. It's based on more voluntary deference and even elements of love at times. The fifth foundation is purity, sanctity. Purity is not just about suppressing female sexuality. It's about any kind of ideology, any kind of idea that tells you that you can attain virtue by controlling what you do with your body, by controlling what you put into your body. And while the political right may moralize sex much more, the political left is really doing a lot of it with food. Food is becoming extremely moralized nowadays, and a lot of it is ideas about purity, about what you're willing to touch or put into your body. I believe these are the 5 best candidates for what's written on the first draft of the moral mind. I think this is what we come with, at least a preparedness to learn all of these things.
So to quickly recap, here are the 5 moral foundations that Jonathan Haidt's proposing here. So there's the care harm, and this is the foundation that's related to our long evolution as mammals with attachment systems and an ability to feel and dislike the pain that we see in others. It underlies virtues like kindness and gentleness and being a nurturer. So that's care harm. The second one is fairness cheating, and this foundation is related to the evolutionary process of reciprocal altruism. So it generates ideas like justice and rights and autonomy. The third is loyalty betrayal, and it's the foundation that's related to our long history as tribal creatures who are able to form shifting coalitions. It underlies the virtues of patriotism and self-sacrifice for the group, and it's active anytime people feel that it's one for all and all for one. Number 4 is the authority subversion, and this foundation was shaped by our long primate history of hierarchical social interactions, and it underlies virtues of leadership and followership, including deference to legitimate authority and a respect for established traditions. And then number 5 is sanctity and degradation, and this foundation was shaped by the psychology of disgust and the idea of contamination. So one of the things that Haidt talks about is that even though these 5 moral frameworks, and maybe there's a 6th, he talks about liberty and oppression as being a potential 6th in other places, but that these come pre-programmed into our brain, but then we interact with people through our lives, and it doesn't mean that each of these 5 areas are of equal importance to everybody. You know, some people care about care and harm and fairness and cheating more than they care about loyalty, betrayal, or authority subversion, etc. So that's what he's going to talk about here.
If there really are 5 systems at work in the mind, 5 sources of intuitions and emotions, then we can think of the moral mind as being like one of those audio equalizers that has 5 channels where you could set it to a different setting on every channel. And my colleagues Brian Nozick and Jesse Graham and I made a questionnaire, which we put up on the web at www.yourmorals.org. And so far, 30,000 people have taken this questionnaire, and you can too. Here are the results. Here are the results from about 23,000 American citizens. People care about harm and care issues. They give high endorsement of these sorts of statements all across the board. Liberals care about it a little more than conservatives. The line slopes down. Same story for fairness. But look at the other 3 lines. For liberals, the scores are very low. Liberals are basically saying, no, this is not morality. In-group authority, this stuff has nothing to do with morality. I reject it. But as people get more conservative, the values rise. We could say that liberals have a kind of a 2-channel or 2-foundation morality. Conservatives have more of a 5-foundation or 5-channel morality. Moral arguments within cultures are especially about issues of in-group authority, purity.
So he's talking about groups here, and I like the way that he described the 5 intuitive moral frameworks, that we're all born with, this rough draft. And he described it as an equalizer where you can raise and lower the different bars, So I think what happens is that each of us has our own different equalizer settings, and that can explain and help us understand why we intuitively respond to things that, we filter through those settings, our sense of morality. And we sort of expect that our equalizer settings are going to be the same for people that we associate with, or if they're not the same, that they should be the same. And if you're able to be a part of a group where others share a similar, compatible equalizer setting, and I'm thinking here of maybe a family unit, I'm going to be talking about my family in a bit, you might expect that the family members would share a similar moral framework. They all grew up together, right? So if this is true, then maybe we should expect to see that in-group members will put aside their individual differences in their equalizer settings, and they'll really work together towards a common good, right? That's what happens, right, Jonathan Haidt? Please, Jonathan Haidt, tell me that's what happens. Please tell me that's what happens.
Told in a paper that was published in Nature a few years ago, in which Ernst Fair and Simon Gachter had people play a commons dilemma, a game in which you give people money, and then on each round of the game, they can put money into a common pot, and then the experimenter doubles what's in there, and then it's all divided among the players. So it's a really nice analog for all sorts of environmental issues, where we're asking people to make a sacrifice, and they themselves don't really benefit from their own sacrifice, but you really want everybody else to sacrifice, but everybody has a temptation to free ride.
Oh, man, see, Jonathan, you were supposed to tell me that people are going to all work to get along, not that they compete with each other. So let me think of a situation with my family where we used to compete with each other. Okay, so this is kind of like the time that Mom got that really good homemade ice cream. We made homemade ice cream and put it in the freezer, and it's a family of 5. And as long as nobody gets into it and starts eating it ahead of time, it's going to be there for dessert later on, and we'll all have equal shares, right? So it's kind of like that time, maybe?
And what happens is that at first people start off reasonably cooperative. On the first round, this is all played anonymously. On the first round, people give about half of the money that they can.
Yeah, which is kind of like, the first day that the ice cream's there in the freezer. You look and you see maybe somebody's taken a little bit of it, but it's mostly all still there, and you're not worried. You're following the rules. You're with the program, even though somebody's taking a little bit, right?
But they quickly see, what, other people aren't doing so much, so I don't want to be a sucker, I'm not going to cooperate. And so cooperation quickly decays from reasonably good down to close to 0.
Yeah, because, you're in the freezer for different reasons, and you start seeing the ice cream's disappearing, and pretty soon, at this rate, it's going to be gone, and you're not going to get any. So you dive in, and you start getting your share now instead of waiting too, right? Kind of how it goes.
But then, and here's the trick, Fair and Gachter said on the 7th round, they told people, you know what, new rule, if you want to give some of your own money to punish people who aren't contributing, you can do that.
Hang on, so if I sacrifice some of the ice cream that I'm supposed to get, and that will punish my brother or my sister or whoever it was that's been getting into the ice cream ahead of time and breaking the rules, they can be punished for that? Okay. Yeah, that sounds That sounds good to me.
And as soon as people heard about the punishment issue going on, cooperation shoots up. It shoots up and it keeps going up. There's a lot of research showing that to solve cooperative problems, it really helps. It's not enough to just appeal to people's good motives. It really helps to have some sort of punishment, even if it's just shame or embarrassment or gossip.
Or mockery. I'm really good at shaming people through mockery.
You need some sort of punishment to bring people, when they're in large groups, to cooperate. There's even some recent research suggesting that religion, priming God, making people think about God, often in some situations leads to more cooperative, more pro-social behavior. Some people think that religion is an adaptation evolved both by cultural and biological evolution to make groups to cohere, in part for the purpose of trusting each other and then being more effective at competing with other groups. I think that's probably right, although this is a controversial issue. But I'm particularly interested in religion, in the origin of religion, and in what it does to us and for us.
And what it does to and for the religious families that we grow up in, for those of us who grew up in religious families.
Because I think that the greatest wonder in the world is not the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is really simple. It's just a lot of rock and then a lot of water and wind and a lot of time, and you get the Grand Canyon. It's not that complicated. This is what's really complicated, that there were people living in places like the Grand Canyon, cooperating with each other, or on the savannas of Africa, or on the frozen shores of Alaska. And then some of these villages grew into the mighty cities of Babylon and Rome and Tenochtitlan. How did this happen? This is an absolute miracle, much harder to explain than the Grand Canyon. The answer, I think, is that they used every tool in the toolbox. It took all of our moral psychology to create these cooperative groups. Yes, you do need to be concerned about harm. You do need a psychology of justice. But it really helps to organize a group if you can have subgroups, and if those subgroups have some internal structure, and if you have some ideology that tells people to suppress their carnality, to pursue higher, nobler ends.
Like making sure there's enough ice cream for everyone. Because ice cream.
And now we get to the crux of the disagreement between liberals and conservatives. Because liberals reject three of these foundations. They say, no, let's celebrate diversity, not common in-group membership. They say, let's question authority, and they say, keep your laws off my body. Liberals have very noble motives for doing this. Traditional authority, traditional morality can be quite repressive and restrictive to those at the bottom, to women, to people that don't fit in. So liberals speak for the weak and oppressed. They want change and justice, even at the risk of chaos. If you're high on openness to experience, revolution is good, it's change, it's fun. Conservatives, on the other hand, speak for institutions and traditions. They want order, even at some cost, to those at the bottom. The great conservative insight is that order is really hard to achieve, it's really precious, and it's really easy to lose. So, as Edmund Burke said, the restraints on men, as well as their liberties, are to be reckoned among their rights. This was after the chaos of the French Revolution.
You know, I don't really know what your experiences were like in the families that you grew up in. I can say for mine, I listen to this and I think about this trait of being more open to new experiences, where you're more liberal in the type of life that you want to lead, or you're being more conservative in your experience and you want to protect and maintain the safety of the status quo. And I think about my parents, where my mom was more on the open to new experience side, and my dad was much more on the conservative, let's protect and respect authority and traditions that keep us in line. And obviously, we're going to be listening in a few minutes here to a discussion with them and my brother and my sister about the divorce, and that dynamic did not work out between the two of them, but I'm sure it does in other families. And what Haidt is going to argue here is that it can be a very good tension and struggle, like a yin and a yang thing that keep people together. It doesn't need to devolve into incompatible, argumentative, combating parties.
So once you see that liberals and conservatives both have something to contribute, that they form a balance on change versus stability, then I think the way is open to step outside the moral matrix. This is the great insight that all the Asian religions have attained. Think about yin and yang. Yin and yang aren't enemies. Yin and yang don't hate each other. Yin and yang are both necessary, like night and day, for the functioning of the world. You find the same thing in Hinduism. There are many high gods in Hinduism. Two of them are Vishnu, the preserver, Shiva, the destroyer, and they work together. You find the same thing in Buddhism. These two stanzas contain, I think, the deepest insights that have ever been attained into moral psychology, from the Zen master Senzan. If you want the truth to stand clear before you, never be for or against. The struggle between for and against is the mind's worst disease. Now, unfortunately, it's a disease that is been caught by many of the world's leaders. But before you feel superior to George Bush, before you throw a stone, ask yourself, do you accept this? Do you accept stepping out of the battle of good and evil? Can you be not for or against anything? Can you be not for or against anything? Can you be not for or against anything?
Boy, that is really a good question, and probably a very, very hard thing to do, to not be for or against anything. When you're a Mormon and you feel like it's you against the world, right? Can you be for the world? If you're an ex-Mormon and you think that Mormons are all wrong and everything that they do is wrong, can you actually be for Mormons instead of against Mormons, or just not be for or against at all, to try and understand? And in a family, when you've got a mother and a father who are going through a tough time and then they divorce, can you not be for or against either one of them and not cast somebody in the bad guy role and the good guy role? Wow, it's really, really hard, because we're so quick to be self-righteous about ourselves and to see the faults in others, and we're blind, really, to the faults in ourselves. So to be able to step out of that and not be for or against anything, but this is one of the things, like, if people out there are wondering, why is Glenn so enamored by this Jonathan Haidt stuff and talking about it so much? I just think this is so important to be able to develop these skills, because I don't think you have to live there where you're not ever for or against anything. I don't think you could really function in the world and be part of a group if you're not for or against things. But to be able to step out of that and have the skill to understand the other side and to negotiate your way in the world in a way that you're not creating conflict with people that disagree with you, that's a really good ideal to aspire to. That's why it is that I'm so interested in this.
That our righteous minds were designed by evolution to unite us into teams, to divide us against other teams, and then to blind us to the truth.
One more time.
Our righteous minds were designed by evolution to unite us into teams, to divide us against other teams, and then to blind us to the truth. So, what should you do? Am I telling you to not strive? Am I telling you to embrace sense-on and stop with this struggle of for and against? No, absolutely not. I'm not saying that. But you can't just go charging in saying you're wrong and I'm right. Because as we just heard, everybody thinks they are right.
It's your fault.
See, it's her fault, and it isn't mine at all.
A lot of the problems we have to solve are problems that require us to change other people. And if you want to change other people, a much better way to do it is to first understand who we are, understand our moral psychology, understand that we all think we're right, and then step out, even if it's just for a moment, step out, check in with sense-on. Step out of the moral matrix, just try to see it as a struggle playing out in which everybody does think they're right, and everybody at least has some reasons. Even if you disagree with them, everybody has some reasons for what they're doing. Step out, and if you do that, that's the essential move to cultivate moral humility, to get yourself out of this self-righteousness, which is the normal human condition. Think about the Dalai Lama. Think about the enormous moral authority of the Dalai Lama, and it comes from his moral humility. And so I think that the answer is to use that passionate commitment to the truth to try to turn it into a better future for us all. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jonathan Haidt. Thank you, honestly, seriously. You know, because like breaking away from the self-righteousness, that really was, like, of all of the reasons that I left the church, that was one of the biggest ones, and that bugged me all the time, like the one true churchness of it that I felt like created so much self-righteousness. And this helps me go, okay, well, maybe it wasn't just the church that was doing it. It's kind of our own biology that we're hardwired to become this way. And, you know, so the church being a man-made organization is also have these things baked into it that it does this. But, you know, so I like this idea of moral humility and creating moral humility. So as I listen to this and I think ahead to my family, I ask, you know, what happens when the social group that you're talking about in all these things is your family, and especially when it becomes a broken family? Are we punishing and shaming each other as ways to try and control the different members of the group? Did my parents split up because one was more liberally open to new experiences than the other? What happens to the balance of a family group when Mama Yin and Papa Yang break away from each other and we lose that? So what role does the 5-pronged moral framework play when that rough draft of our moral framework was baked inside of the oven of Mormon culture for dozens and dozens of years? Lots of metaphors in there, I know, but moral humility, can we get that? Can I get that? So that's what I'm going to try to do today in front of all of you, and I may fail miserably, but I want to first try and understand my own moral psychology and the moral psychology of my dad and my mom and my brother and my sister. So I want to step away, if I can, from this good guy versus bad guy paradigm, and I want to get away from who's to blame for this or that of not jiving with my own sense of moral wrong and right. I want to try to figure out what it means to have moral humility, because Lord knows I need it. Right, John Dehlin?
Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. My name is John Dehlin. I'm very excited to have you with us today for a very special feature.
All right, first thing, he wasn't really that excited. I mean, he kind of is obligated to say that.
Today we have with us a longtime listener, approached me a few weeks ago about discussing the issue of divorce.
Yeah, I mean, a long-time listener. That's kind of funny that he called me that. But so here's the story behind this. So this was recorded, I think we did it in like March, April, May, somewhere in that time frame, 2010. So it was 7 years ago, and I was living in Japan at the time. I was living in Tokyo, and my mom was in Utah, Dad Arizona, my sister was in the Midwest, and my brother was on the West Coast. And so we're all in different places. And I thought it'd be nice to get on and have this conversation with them, because we hadn't talked at this point. I think it was 13 years, and the 5 of us had not talked together since the divorce. It had been 13 years. Right around this time, I had started podcasting with Mormon Expression, so I was a couple of months into Mormon Expression, and I toyed with the idea of doing this interview for Mormon Expression, but my mom and my dad being believers at the time, my mom has since left the church, but and I'll say more about that later, but I didn't feel comfortable doing Mormon Expression because the tone of Mormon Expression was, I thought, would be more jarring for them, and this may have created a little bit of rift, I don't know, between John Larson and myself. It could have happened, but so that's why I approached John Dehlin on this. I thought that it'd be a much better format to have the conversation on Mormon Stories than to do on Mormon Expression. So that's why I approached John. That's why this was published on Mormon Stories. And anyway, we'll get back to it.
He comes from an LDS family, and that family experienced a divorce several years ago, and he felt like it could be interesting for us to bring all of his family onto the podcast, including both his parents, who are now in other marriages, to talk about divorce and several aspects of divorce, from how it's affected the family, how the LDS Church did or didn't play a role, lessons that can be learned. And
have you ever listened to Mormon Stories and just wish that you could kind of like cut to the chase of some of the things that John's saying? You probably do that when you're listening to Infants on Thrones too, and things that I'm saying. But anyway, I'm gonna cut to the chase here because I can. I'm editing this for a Froback Friday episode. I'm just gonna cut this out.
And I would like to do a roll call, and beginning in a patriarchal order, I would like to first introduce Papa. Papa, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Papa is the former patriarch and of this family.
I just imagine my dad listening to John Dehlin calling me former patriarch and thinking, "What are you talking about? I'm still the patriarch. What's going on here?"
Mama, are you there?
I am.
Thanks for joining us, Mom.
Thanks.
And Glenn, you're the grand master of this orchestration. Are you there, Glenn?
I prefer puppet master, but I'll take grand.
Puppet master. Okay. Glenn, thanks for joining us.
See, he was supposed to laugh when I said puppet master. He didn't do it. It's really disconcerting. He didn't get the memo.
And for coming up with this idea. Jeff, Glenn's brother. Are you there, Jeff?
Yes, I am.
Jeff, thanks for coming on.
Hello.
And we have Melissa.
Hey, that's me.
All right, so 7 years ago, a quick catch-up to where we are today. So my dad's still an active member of the church. He was in the bishopric in an ASU singles ward for many, many years, one of the counselors in the bishopric. And I've had listeners in the past reach out to me and say, hey, your dad was my bishop or my counselor. It's always interesting to hear from that. His name is also Glenn Ostlund. I'm Glenn Ostlund II. And so he has people approach him. We don't really talk much about the podcast, obviously. But when we do, it comes up, he'll tell me that people come up to him and they think that he's the Glenn Ostlund that's associated with Infants on Thrones and what happened and what's going on. I don't know, that's kind of funny. But so he's still very active in the church, and he's remarried. He's been remarried for 17 years. And I recently moved back to Arizona, so I'm living about 15 minutes away, and it's nice to get to know him again. And so anyway, that's where my dad is after 7 years. My mom, in what you're going to be hearing today that we recorded 7 years ago, she was still active member of the church. That has changed. So she left the church, and if you listen to the podcast, you've heard her a couple of times. That's her situation. She's still up in Utah. And my sister, she's going to be moving to Arizona in a couple of months as well. I hope you don't mind, Missy, that I've announced that over the podcast. But she's on her way here, which we're really excited about. And at the time that we recorded this, I think she'd been out of the church for a year, maybe 2 years. Yeah, so that's her. And then my brother Jeff, he's at the time that we recorded this, he was divorced, has a son named Curtis, that comes up at certain points in the conversation. And he has since remarried, and very kind of him, he asked me to perform the wedding ceremony for he and his wife Courtney, and did that. That was awesome. And they're doing great together. So they're going on, I think, a little over 4 years now. And then there's me, who 7 years ago, I was married to my first wife, and about a year after we recorded this, we divorced. And it's kind of interesting to me. Like, honestly, I haven't gone back and listened to this in a long time, but I do remember that there were times where I was talking about marriage and divorce, and I had that thought in my head, hey, I could be divorced. This could happen. I know that mine is a rocky marriage, and so trying to be careful with what I was saying, but I knew that was a possibility. So yes, I did get a divorce about a year after this was recorded, and then I'm remarried. I've been married for 4 years as well. So anyway, that's catching you up with all of the cast of characters. So we'll just jump back in with what John was doing with us.
I guess I thought it would make sense to begin by just giving a little bit of history.
Papa is a senior citizen at this point, active in the church all his life, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, active and involved in the church all their lives. Graduated from BYU. I'm an attorney by profession, trial attorney by choice, and how much more do you want?
That sounds good. Thank you. How about you, Mom?
Yes, I also grew up in a multi-generational LDS family, and family across the plains, all of that, active in the church, and have a strong testimony.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
I also have had a lot of education. I have a doctorate and graduated from ASU. And what else do you want to know?
And Mom and Dad, would you guys characterize yourselves as sort of literal true believing types within the church?
I don't know if that's a hard question. Literal?
Yes.
True believing?
Let me answer that question for you, Mom. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, this is actually kind of an interesting thing here. You know, why is it so hard for my mom to answer that question if she's a literal, true, believing member of the church? And I think the reason is because at that point, she didn't know any other way. You know, it's kind of like that fish in water analogy where the fish doesn't really understand what water is because that's all they know. It's just what is. So I don't know, but maybe that's what's going on. I think that's probably a kind way to interpret that, but I'm okay with that.
My children say yes, and I think that, and I am,
But Mom is supporting Democrats, so there is a little bit.
So she's suspect.
I am a delegate to the state convention for the Democrats, so.
Yeah,
Point
I'm having second thoughts actually.
Yeah.
About this whole thing.
Yeah.
How would you classify yourself, Dad?
I wouldn't classify myself as a typical true believer. I don't consider myself to be a member of the sheep that follow along blindly. I consider myself very active in the church and very much a believer in the church, but not because somebody else has spoken.
I don't think that's what they meant.
You know, what do you guys hear when you're listening to my dad give that answer? I hear a lot of defensiveness, and I think to be fair and understanding, it was really hard for him to agree to come on when he knew that I'm not really in the church anymore. My sister's not in the church. My brother's not in the church. This John Dehlin guy, was before he was excommunicated and was so well known as being this horrible sheep in wolf clothing. Is that right? No, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. I don't know. He keeps changing. But you know, my dad, the question was, do you consider yourself a literal believer? And initially his response was, okay, I've got to protect myself here. And I think this could be an example, maybe, of his sense of morality being triggered here, that he has a very strong loyalty to the church, and he feels like, oh, this is about to be attacked. Or maybe it's even a strong loyalty to himself and you know, his choices. And so fearing that that's going to be ridiculed, he gets way out in front of it and says, yeah, I'm not one of those blind people that, you know, doesn't think. Like, well, that's not what we were asking. But I think this is why. It's just showing how uncomfortable it was for him to be here, which he should get tons of props for. That, you know, thank you for coming on and doing this. You didn't need to do this. But he did it for us, and it was an expression of love that he would sacrifice his own comfort so that we could have more ice cream in the freezer later, right? So thank you for doing this, Dad.
I don't think that's what they meant.
I just mean,
well,
this is the one and only true church.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And like if I try to classify you, Dad, I would say that you come out of the Bruce R. McConkie, Hugh Nibley kind of model of how to explore Mormonism and interpret Mormonism, and not to suggest that you're following blindly, but that's kind of how if I have to characterize where I kind of put you in that area. Do you think that's fair?
I think it's very flattering.
Okay. Well, that speaks volumes.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to test and prod and come to my own conclusions, and I like to go outside of what's normal mainstream.
Now you're going to hear some laughter coming up here in response to what my dad just said, because and this is one of those really hard things that I struggle with, because here I want to encourage my dad in this case to be open and to be honest, to be vulnerable, and yet when he gives a vulnerable response to how he thinks he is, the reaction from my brother and my sister and I is incredulous. It's belittling and it's mocking, because we view him as somebody who doesn't figure things out for himself, but follows the prophet, and that the decisions that he makes, like he does explore things, he does read things, and he's about to talk about pseudepigrapha, although he pronounces it the way that I used to, Randy, but he doesn't ever explore it in the way that you could come to the conclusion that it's not true. It's always, it's true, I'm going to take that as my given, I can't go anywhere beyond that, but I'll explore within the smaller confines of this being true. And that's not really acceptable to me, my brother, my sister, and so we ridicule it, we laugh, and that's not open-minded. And I think that's probably an example of what Jonathan Haidt talked about with the people who are more open to new experiences or those who are less open to new experiences. My dad's not willing to consider the church not being true. And so is that something that we should really ridicule him for? I don't know. Not if we want to have a good relationship with him, right? So I listened back to the way that we responded to my dad in this interview 7 years ago, and I feel bad about it, but just wanted to call that out, make that point.
And I like to go outside of what's normal mainstream. For example, I don't know too many people that go looking for pseudepigraphas or Septuagints, but I do.
Yeah,
that's good.
Okay.
And Mom, where did you and Papa meet?
We met at an institute dance at ASU.
How cute!
Wow, that is so awkward.
Okay.
That's awesome. And then how comfortable are we about talking about some of the things that maybe led to the divorce?
So some more behind the scenes information on this. We actually had 2 calls with John. The first one was to address this question right here. How comfortable are we talking about the causes that led to the divorce, or how personal or specific are we going to be? I recorded both conversations, and so in the final episode that was released, it included parts of the first conversation where we were just talking about how we were going to talk about it, and it included parts of the second conversation where we started just talking about it. So it's seamlessly interwoven together, and even I don't remember as I'm listening to this which pieces were from which conversation. But ultimately we decided not to talk too much about the causes of divorce, but I'll give you a really quick answer to that. My mom didn't feel loved. She didn't feel like she was really connected with my dad, that they were interested in the same kinds of things, and it was really hard for her, suffocating for her. And in the blame game with it, I was really hard on my mom. I was more angry at my mom for her choice to leave the marriage over what I didn't think were grounds worthy of leaving. There was no physical abuse. There wasn't any, stepping out. It was really, really strange to all of us. And so, unfortunately, my mom got cast in the role of the bad guy. And this was something that, my brother and sister and I all agreed on to different degrees, different levels that we felt it. And, it's unfortunate. And so just like I wanted to apologize to my dad earlier for the way that we mocked his response to this, I want to apologize to my mom, and she probably is actually going to listen to this, for the way that we handled her decision to divorce, because it was against the grain of Mormonism. It was against what we wanted. We wanted our family to stay together. We didn't understand it. But we can look back at those choices, that choice to divorce, and look, my mom, who she's married to now, is fantastic, and they have such a great relationship. And the same thing for my dad and who he's married to. They have a good relationship, and it's better. So it's one of those weird things. How can you say that you're thankful for divorce? Because it you're raised to think that it's so terrible and something to avoid. And having now been through a divorce, I can see why it is terrible. It's something that I would have liked to avoid it too. But at the same time, I'm much happier where I am and in the marriage that I'm in now than I was before. So it's just this really strange paradigm shift to say that you're thankful for divorce. And that's where I'll pick up from that previous conversation.
Well, I think it is important at least to just address that. I mean, I think a lot of times when people hear of families, having a divorce, their mind automatically will think like, oh, well, what was wrong? Who cheated? Was it abuse? You think of those kinds of, really big dramatic things. And in our situation, there wasn't anything like that, which makes it, emotionally a little bit trickier. But I think that could be an important part for people to know, that it was, just maybe simply, seemed to be incompatibility, or however we want to just say it, even that way, just so that it's not, like there was some horrific event that caused a split. I think that, even that information could be useful.
And I've had conversations both with Dad and Mom as you've kind of worked through the dissonance that the church teaches one thing about marriage and divorce, but what you've actually experienced through your divorce in your current marriages, you're in a much better, happier place, and you're thankful. I mean, how can you say that you're thankful for divorce? That seems so contrary to anything that we hear in the church and in the messages that we have of families can be together forever. But here you have this experience. So how do you reconcile that? And when in your case, Mom, because there wasn't any obvious reason that people on the outside could see, why you made the decision to divorce, you had to carry all that alone. And, you felt very judged by us, by me, people around you, and it was a very lonely experience for you. And then we spent the next 10 minutes talking about how we're going to talk about it and blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to skip to where John really starts getting into the meat, asking my mom and dad some questions about how they reconciled the divorce and starting to compare that against their experiences in the church.
So did you both have to each find a way to reconcile? Why did God tell you to get married and yet it didn't work out?
Yeah, I did.
Yin.
No, not really.
Yang.
Why not?
You kind of cut to the nub of the experience that I had as a result of the divorce and during the divorce. And the nub of it is that my faith, if you will, or my concepts were reinforced mightily with respect to this concept of free agency. Moral agency, if you will.
Moral agency from a moral framework. Okay, I'm going to start listening really closely to what he's going to say here.
People can change. They can have experiences that are genuine and legitimate, but over the period of years, their attitudes change, circumstances change, and that which could have been no longer is comfortable. For example...
All right, we're going to get to the example in a second, but so I'm trying to apply some Jonathan Haidt stuff here. So his initial instinctual gut response and feeling about all of this, I think, is the affirmation of his belief in the church and the principle of free agency. And so now, that's his elephant, and it's rooted in maybe the loyalty, morality of being loyal to what you've been taught and the teachings that you've received, maybe some authority in there coming from scriptures or prophets or wherever he's getting this information about families being together forever is what he's thinking about. And so his elephant feels that way, and his writer is trying to articulate it and explain, and especially doing in kind of an awkward situation where the person who he's talking about that has changed and therefore invalidated what was otherwise available to both of them is also on the call, part of this conversation. It's my mom. So he's like pointing a finger at my mom and blaming her for changing the rules of the game.
That which could have been no longer is comfortable. For example, or for a literal comment, we've tossed around the phrase families can be forever. And most people, I guess, focus on the word forever. And I focus on the word can. It's not a for sure thing. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes cooperation, it takes long suffering, it takes enduring to the end. It's not a guaranteed for sure thing. It's just a beginning. And it's a concept. It's a concept that has great potential, but it doesn't get realized without a lot of work.
So, Dad, can I cut you off here just for a minute? Because I can imagine if I'm Mom and I'm listening to this, that I might be thinking, oh, is he blaming me?
It's your fault. See, it's her fault. And it isn't mine at all. But what?
For being the one that changed, or being the one that, didn't stick with it. Do you see, like going back to John's earlier question, that there were things that you could have done or should have done differently in that to make it so the families can be together forever?
Short answer, yes. Explanation. I think I've told each one of you, save and except John, over the years that I'm confident that I could have done something better. I could have done probably lots of things better. I'm confident that I am to blame in major respects for the breakup. I'm not sure what they are. I don't know what they are. And that's why I said earlier, John, in response to your question, I'm willing to talk about my perceptions of what happened, but I'm not really sure what happened. All I know is that at points in time, things weren't going the way they were supposed to be going. And, is it a blaming of your mother? I don't want to necessarily blame, but the facts are the facts.
I love that word, necessarily. Have you noticed how necessarily can be put into a sentence like, oh, I don't really want this person harmed. I don't really necessarily want them harmed, which indicates that you want them maybe a little harmed or something. I don't know. Okay. So, okay.
Okay. So one theme that just comes out for me, and this comes out for me in all the counseling and therapy that I do, is that there are some families that talk about everything, and there's some families that barely talk about anything, and just have major elephants in the room for decades, and it just never gets talked about. Is that a topic worth discussing here?
I think we are discussing the elephant.
Right.
I think it's what Glenn's trying to get to is let's talk about the elephant.
And the writer, but this is years before I had ever heard of Jonathan Haidt. So we're talking about different types of elephants here.
At least, is that what I'm getting, Glenn, from you?
Yeah. I mean, because I think that there are certain things that we're able to talk about, and certain things that we've tried to talk about and without much success. I don't know that we're one of those families. At least my experience hasn't been that we're one of those families that just hides things and doesn't talk. But no. I don't know that the environment has always been very receptive to that.
Right.
You know what I just realized? What I meant when I said this was that my dad specifically doesn't explore in the ways that I like to explore topics in the world, especially topics in the church, because his commitment to his faith and his commitment to his testimony, his morality. He is such a moral person. Let me put it this way. His morals are so strong in the areas of authority, in the areas of loyalty, that he will never even think that the church might possibly not be true. And he would fit into what Jonathan Haidt described earlier as the more conservative mindset. I'm more on that exploratory side. I want to explore new ideas. I want to learn new things. And that, it wasn't easy for me to get to a place where I would consider that the church might not be true, but I did get there. And so I think in the case of their divorce, like talking about what could you have done differently? What could I have done? I think there were also restrictions and limits to what both my dad and my mom were willing to see in themselves, or able to see in themselves, or hear from their kids about that. But I think it's mainly what I was thinking about was on the church side, that my dad and I would speculate about, and speculate might not be the right word, but I don't know, a lot of speculation. There were a lot of things that he would read in Pseudepigrapha and tie into other things. I'll mention a couple of them because I've always thought that these are interesting. He pulled me aside once. I was probably 13 or 14 years old, and showed me some scriptures in the Doctrine and Covenants, and I would have to look it up, but it basically is a parable about Jesus going to different farms, maybe something like that. Like in every hour he goes to a different place, and then it says, "Oh, these kingdoms are likened unto the." I don't know. It's basically planets. So the way that my dad interpreted it, I'll cut to the chase. It was planets. That there are 12 planets, and he would use the scriptures. He would use some things that he found in Pseudepigrapha. He would use some things that he found in other like unpublished revelations kind of stuff. And we would speculate about those kinds of things. The one that I really found very interesting was something about the Watchers. And this was another one of these things that he like triangulated all these different sources, and was presenting to me this theory that he had found that the Greek gods, Zeus, Apollo, Hera, Athena, etc., that they really had been actual people. They were fallen angels, and that early in Earth's history, before the flood, before Noah's flood, there were fallen angels on the earth that reproduced with human women, and their offspring were the giants. And this is a part of Middle Eastern mythology, and it does come up in these older texts that you would find in the Pseudepigrapha or Septuagint, these kinds of things. And it was something, I think Nibley even had a piece about this, that these watchers were fallen angels that had been assigned to look after man and the four corners of the earth, but they were deceived by the beauty of women, and so they fell, and they were these fallen angels. It's wild stuff, but I loved it. It was something that was great. It really tied me and my dad together, and I lament losing that, because then I would take it into things. I would take them, like, let's talk about the Book of Abraham. What's going on with this? But we would never be able to explore beyond the part of, oh yeah, it's definitely true. What Joseph Smith said is true. There's nothing else. And I'd say, really? Because there's stuff in here like Zelph, the white Nephite. Like, what's going on with Zelph, Dad? And it would just kind of shut down. So it was conversations like that would frustrate me, and that's what I was talking about. And I would think that was a flaw in him. And where the Jonathan Haidt stuff is helping me is I'm seeing it's not a flaw in him. It's an incompatibility between the two of us, and that frustrates me, but that doesn't make it a flaw in him. And I think that's a really, really, really important distinction for me to just change my mindset in the way that I approach him and the way that I think about him.
Right.
With either parent? With either parent?
With either parent. With my dad more than my mom. But I also feel like the skills of being able to deliver a message in a safe way haven't been there either on my part. So I don't think it's just on that we haven't been willing to talk about it, but maybe haven't known how to talk about it in a good way or how to receive it in a good way. Yeah, so see, this conversation recorded 7 years ago was destined to be repurposed in this Jonathan Haidt righteous mind. Let's try and figure out better ways to bridge the gaps and the differences between us. It was destined for this kind of a conversation. I'm really proud of myself. Actually, listening back to my 7 year ago self, I'm glad I took that position. Yay me!
So I guess we don't need to dig too much into the early years of the marriage, because this is mostly about the divorce. But let me give both Papa and Mom each a chance to just reflect a little bit on some of the high points or some of the main signposts in the marriage prior to the divorce, to the extent that that you're comfortable talking?
Well, the marriage prior to the divorce, I would characterize really as two marriages. The first 20 or so years I thought were very good and rewarding and mutually rewarding, and mutually fulfilling. The last 7 or so were not so fulfilling, not so enjoyable.
Okay.
You want details?
No, that's a good start. Mom, would you add or detract anything from that?
Yeah, my experience was different than that. I would say that there was a desire on my part for the great bulk of the marriage, easily from the beginning, wanting to communicate things that didn't get heard. And so I didn't see it as two marriages. I just saw it getting more and more challenging.
So going from not so good to worse over the 20X years?
And I don't want to necessarily pick that.
Not necessarily, no.
And I don't want to say that every minute was like that, but, because that's not true. But my experience was different.
That's an important question then that comes from all this is, how do you reconcile the church's emphasis on the importance of marriage, of eternal families, of the solemn covenant, and the fact that you both were told by God to get married, with the notion that through your divorce you found people you're more compatible with and are much happier about, and no harm, no foul, you're both sealed to your spouses.
Right.
So what? So
they just had to have me, John.
And me.
And Jeff.
Yeah.
And Mark.
I could have been thrown away, I think.
No. No, I mean, I think, John, too, I mean, speaking from my own experience, that's one thing that's been really hard for me in my faith struggles is if I can believe that I feel that the family ever really was, ordained, our family specifically, ordained of God, or was it, I can see very much, cultural and social pressures put on, the young marriage, and that happens a lot in the church.
So, Dad, I guess knowing how important the church is to you and to Mom, I imagine it was devastating for you to have to break this news to your children. Is that right?
That's an easy question to answer. It was horrible. It was very, very unpleasant and very, very unsettling.
So in this situation, it was Mom who felt like there needed to be a change. Is that right, Mom?
That's right.
Okay. And what was it like for you? You must have been feeling a pretty heavy burden then.
Oh, I did. It was a huge, huge decision that did not come lightly or easily, and it was really hard. It was pretty much heartbreaking for me with the kids, especially.
And did you feel like, we talked about this a couple days ago, but did you feel like this was something you were guided or led or even inspired to do from your perspective?
I guess I'm going to say it felt confirmed. I think that's the best way to say it.
Much like your decision to get married in the first place. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that.
I remember that when you told me, it was with the authority of the celestial room of the Mesa Temple, and that was where you had felt very strongly that this was what you needed to do, and that it's what the Lord wanted you to do, or at least the Lord had the support for you, and that created some huge dissonance issues for me. But in later discussions, you don't remember that having happened.
I don't remember it. I've never remembered it the way you have told me that I'd said it to you.
Yeah.
I've never remembered it that way. I know that I felt peace and confirmation, but it wasn't like I felt a bolt of lightning or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, you told me as well. I remember.
So you hear people say that today, especially after the 2016 election cycle, that we're living in a world, what did they say? Like a post-truth world where there's alternative facts. Well, let's spend a little time talking about alternative facts and what happens when there are alternative facts. So you can probably hear it from what I said, what my mom said, what Melissa just said, that there's different versions of the story from what happened, from what I remember and what my mom remembers. And, this happens a lot. And I've had a tendency to be a real stickler for my memory and say, no, I've got a really good memory. I'm remembering this right. And you heard, Missy chime in and say, oh yeah, I remember it. You told me this too, Mom. And it really just caused more of a wedge between us as we had these alternative facts. And so one of the things that I've liked about the Jonathan Haidt stuff in the book is talking about the role that a writer plays, the metaphor of the elephant and the rider, the role that the writer plays in providing a post hoc rational explanation as to why you did or said whatever it is that you did, and that post hoc explanation is wrong. It's flawed. It's a fiction that we create to explain to ourselves why we did what we did. And looking at it that way helps me let go of this need to get on the same page with facts. I can't browbeat my mom into saying, no, this is what you told me. You said that you got the confirmation from God in the celestial room of the temple that you were supposed to divorce Dad. Did she really say it that way? I don't know. I could be misremembering it. But I'm at a point now where I don't feel like I have to hold her feet to the fire and say, yes, admit it. That's what you said. That's what you told me. That's what you did. And I think I'm at a place now where I can understand that even if that's what she said at the time, that she was just creating a narrative to try and explain to me, to try to make a rational argument for something that wasn't rationally concluded. She didn't use reason to come to her conclusion. It was what she felt inside and what she'd been feeling inside for a long time. And so if the temple played a role in helping magnify those feelings or making her more sensitive to those feelings, that's where she came out of that going, yes, this is a hard thing. I've got to do this. I don't know. It helps me now to look at it from this elephant rider perspective and be less strident and dogmatic and insistent. There's your 3 pattern, that my recollection, my version of it is the truth. So take that for whatever it's worth.
So I imagine that some of you have...
Wait. Hang on a second, John. I'm not finished with that previous thought, because as I was concluding and wrapping up, I thought, okay, let's anticipate what some of the listeners are thinking as they're hearing me say this. And from comments that we get on the website and other places, there's always something like, yes, but just because somebody believes that something is true doesn't make it true. And yes, that's absolutely right. So like if you're saying 2 + 2 = 4, right? It always equals 4. But you've got somebody who believes that it equals 5 and somebody else who believes that it equals 7. So just because you let them believe that it's 7 or you let them believe that it's 5 when it's really 4, do you really have to argue that point? Because there's probably more going on with whatever group is agreeing on the incorrect information. So if you've got a family or you've got a church group or whatever it is that says, oh, no, 2 + 2 is 5, and that's part of the entry to be a part of that group, and then there's certain benefits that people get from being part of that group, like being a Mormon and believing the first vision story, even though there's all these alternative versions of it that indicate that it's probably made up. How can you just let people believe that story when it's not true? It's not true. But look, what does it really matter? And this is where I think I get in trouble with some listeners and sometimes other infants when I'm saying it doesn't really matter. I hear Jake now going, of course it matters, But it doesn't really in the end. What matters is the value and the benefit that you're getting from being a member of this group. So that itself is true. So the fact that the group agreeing that 2 + 2 is 5, that's something that binds them together and they get benefit from that. That is equally true to 2 + 2 equaling 4. So it's like, where do you want to focus? What's your eventual goal in arguing or disagreeing? I could argue with my mom that, no, this is what you told me. You said that this happened in the temple, and I'd never let it go. And it would just stay as this thing that's in between us that we're never able to move past, and we don't have as close of a relationship because there's things like this that keep coming up. So anyway, I just wanted to respond to that. Maybe people agree, that don't agree, whatever. I just don't think that it's that important to nitpick over the details of everything. There's some things that absolutely, yes, we do have to agree on, but things like this, we can recognize our own fallibility, like my memory may be wrong, and I think that's part of having, what is it that Jonathan Haidt talked about? Moral humility, being humble enough to recognize we don't have to agree on what's really right or wrong here. We can look at other things. I don't know. Talking around in circles. Fun. Talking around in circles on Infants on Thrones. You're the one that's listening to it.
So I imagine that some of you have thought about the difficulty of, we're all members of the church, we're all seeking to tap into divine guidance. Yet in this case, it's pretty clear that Dad didn't receive the same inspiration as Mom did, and both of you received inspiration that the marriage was to be. Have any of you spent time trying to work through that? I'll start with Mom on that one.
The fact that we didn't have the same inspiration about it, or
the fact you're both believing members, and this isn't a loaded question because the spirit is complex, and this highlights a very difficult part of the LDS faith for me, and that's that how do you tell between emotion and the spirit? What do you do when one person receives one answer and somebody else receives another? But if you think about it, both of you felt inspired to get married by the Spirit, and you, Mom, felt like you were being led to end the relationship while Dad wasn't getting those same feelings. How do you work through God and the Spirit's hand in reconciling that? Have you thought about that?
I guess I just accepted what I received, and I recognized it was not something that he was open to or willing to see.
It's your fault. See, it's her fault. And it isn't mine at all. But what?
And I'm trying to keep this simple for tonight. So,
sure.
So that's just, I guess I kind of put it that way, that, like I believe that inspiration happens as you ask the questions and you're open to receive whatever the answers are. And if you don't want to know those answers, you're not going to get them.
Right.
But I also accept that people have different perceptions, and I want to say that too. So.
Sure. And Dad, how have you processed that apparent conundrum or paradox?
Well, there are actually two answers to that question. The first answer is that based on what I was told, I'm not so sure that Mom ever had the confirmation or answer that she thought she had at the beginning of the marriage. What I was told was that she'd never loved me. She married me because her parents told her that it would be the right thing for her to do, but that she'd never loved me, and that it had taken her this long to make the decision that she wasn't going to stay in a loveless marriage. And there's no need to go beyond that simple statement. So the first premise of both of us receiving confirmations, looking backwards, I question. However, the Spirit tells people and confirms things to people at different times in their lives based on information and based on things that are necessary at the time. But people change, they develop in different ways, and what is right for somebody to do at one point in their life is not necessarily the same, not right for them to do at all periods of their life. Scriptures are full of examples of that. A single one might be...
No scriptures. No scriptures. Edit out the scriptures.
Nephi was commanded to kill Laban to...
Wait. Is my dad using the Nephi killing Laban scripture to shed further light and knowledge on his marriage and divorce to my mom? Really? Like beheading somebody? Is this it? Okay, all right. Well, let's listen to this one.
Nephi was commanded to kill Laban to obtain the place. That doesn't mean that he was a murderer for the rest of his life.
But doesn't it, though? I mean, Nephi never went back and unmurdered Laban. Okay, all right. Stop arguing about alternative facts. Stop it.
But he was supposed to do something at a particular time that he was not supposed to do at any other time. I feel that it would be not inconsistent with my understanding of the operation of the Spirit for a couple such as Mom and I, at the ages we were when we got married, to believe that we were in love and to believe that it was the right thing for us to do to get married. And it was the right thing for us to do to get married at that time.
Just like it was the right thing for Nephi to murder Laban at that time, but not murder people at other times. I'm mocking again, aren't I? I can't help it.
But through the process of time, because of directions I went or directions she went, that unity no longer existed. I think that's one of the reasons why the DNC talks about the sealing being a potential sealing, and that we're really not a forever family. We're really not sealed until the sealing from the Holy Spirit of promise occurs. And that doesn't happen simultaneous with the marriage ceremony. It happens over the period of the couple's lives and their actions and conduct. So that's how I processed it, that it was the right thing to do at the time. We have 4 beautiful children as a result of that union.
I've got a younger brother who died when he was 2 weeks old. He was 2 years younger than me. That's why my dad's saying 4.
Great memories and experiences, and some not so great and good. But it wasn't a total disaster, and it wasn't a total wrong thing. It just didn't work out.
Dad, were you pretty devastated at the time, and did you feel like a failure?
Well, yeah. How could you not feel a failure when the woman that I felt very privileged to be married to tells you that she doesn't love you and has never loved you? And despite the fact that she's had 4 children with you, she's never loved you. Yeah, it's kind of devastating. It causes you to question who and what you are, and whether or not whether you amount to what you thought you amounted to. It's very devastating.
And Mom, I've said a thing or two to my wife in my day out of frustration or sadness. Do you look back today with that being a fair characterization of you having never loved Dad, or do you feel like maybe you didn't say those words, you said it in a different way, or that's just you were feeling sad or trying to break out at the time? Do you look on that history a little bit differently?
You know, I think it's very complicated, and to say that I wouldn't say that now probably like that. I would say that I wanted to, and there were things that felt compelling, and I feel like that, like I say, I started out feeling pretty much intimidated, and I think there could have been more love grow.
Can I interject?
I'd be happy for you too. This is way heavier than I want it to be.
I mean, you and I had a conversation last summer about, your whole leading up to marrying Dad, and, now me being married and in a different situation than I was when the divorce happened. I could see things from a different perspective, maybe, with a little more understanding and compassion. But I think maybe you're trying to be a little too politically correct, because even at that time you were saying that you still kind of felt that you never really loved Dad the way that you maybe should love a husband, or maybe you had expectations that I specifically remember you saying things like, that you were taught that any worthy man and any worthy young woman would be able to make it work.
That's right.
That you had kind of had those feelings, and I don't know.
Well, let me take the focus off the direct relationship and sort of ask a more abstract question. I think we would all agree that one of the things the church can do really well is families. I mean, I don't think there's anybody who'd say that the Mormon Church gets families wrong for the most part. So, starting with that premise, and that's how I feel. I guess, Mom, would it be fair to say that the combination of getting married too early, the pressure to get married, the other dynamics of callings and sort of the lifestyle that's expected can sometimes suck someone young in and propel them into a direction that maybe isn't right for them, and that might not even be a Mormon thing at all. That might just be a societal thing. It sounds like that might be how you would reflect upon what happened. Is that?
Yeah, and I think I was very much a pleaser at that time, wanting to please my parents, wanting to please Papa. I really did want to.
And wanting to please God, right? I mean, you thought this was something that you were supposed to be doing.
Absolutely, yeah. And Melissa's right in that's what I had been taught. So even though I may not have had the feelings that I now have experienced and know how different that is, and I didn't know. And so anyway, I went forward. And I know that I was scared the 6 months we were engaged. I would call and say, I don't think this is going to work. And I'd cry. And then I got reassured it was going to be fine. And so I just went along.
Yeah. And I guess, Mom, from your perspective, it's not like you didn't try to make it work.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But did you just kind of reach a breaking point at some point then? I mean,
yeah, pretty much.
Hashtag duh.
So let's start with Melissa this time. What was it like as a kid to process your framing of the gospel, the LDS Church, with the dissolution of your parents' marriage and of your eternal family?
I had a really hard time. I was young. I was in Young Women's. I think I was 14 or 15, and it was right around the time I was preparing to get my patriarchal blessing, and I remember going in really kind of nervous about it. But when the patriarch started off with the prayer, and, of course you get the copy later, it talked about being sent to a home of, righteous parents and goodly parents, and be thankful for their example and all that they've done for you, and, those kinds of things. And it said a line specifically that you will serve them in due time. And, my parents are great, and I'm blessed because of their example and their sacrifice on my behalf, and I need to be thankful. And I can look back at that now and see it differently, but at the time when I read it, it gave me comfort in that I thought they were not going to get divorced. I felt that this was kind of like a sign or a way of comforting for me, something that I'd been struggling with, in a way of saying that, no, they're goodly parents. You were sent to them because of this union, because they have this special gift of the gospel, and you guys are chosen to be a family, to be together. And it made me think that, oh, great, then they're not really going to get divorced. And when it did go ahead and happen, I was crushed. I didn't know what to think. That happened to other people's families. It didn't happen to my family. I remember the one good thing that did come from it was my mom moved into a new ward, and I was able to find really good friends there. And not to say that everybody in the home ward was really bad either. I look back now and again can see things differently, but at that time I just needed support. I just needed people to be my friend and not be judgmental or, pity me. And unfortunately I didn't feel that there were anyone who could really understand what I was going through and help me with that in that ward. I do remember, I would go to girls' camp with that ward, and I remember, singing "The Families Can Be Together Forever," and we would do little skits about your families being together and being reunited in heaven, and it just was so hard for me. I would just bawl, and the only thing that really got me through those times, I did feel that I developed my own testimony at that time, and really it just kind of made me take the focus off of my parents and that family and focus on what I wanted my future family to be like. And for me, I just kind of had to let go. And of course that took a long time, but just realized that there was nothing I could do about it. And I could be bitter about it forever, or I could move on and try not to make the same mistakes that I saw in my parents.
Right. Jeff, what was it like for you?
I had already made a bed at that point in time to where I was away from the church anyways. So I really didn't have, I really don't have an experience one way or the other. As I had stated, I was gone for the summer, came back, found out that was what was going on. Shortly, within the next year and a half or so, after I'd gotten back, I had found the gal who was my future wife, the mother of my 11-year-old son at this point, and we've been divorced now for a year, but we had ended up moving out together, and I was out looking for something else, not really having a strong faith in the church, but having a strong faith in the Lord God Jesus Christ, so.
And did you ever have a hard time reconciling the divorce with your spiritual worldview?
No, not at all. I mean, I think I've got, I see things a lot differently than a lot of members of the LDS faith.
How so?
Well, and that's hard to answer that because, everything that I've got, moving forward, is from when I was a child, what I remember. And I can also see how skewed that view was as I was growing up in the first place. So, let's see here. How so? One big thing is that, I don't understand, what the sealing aspect means. My understanding of that was that, the family was supposed to be together forever. And, things that we've been talking about even here right now, I guess that doesn't mean that that's the case. If, how did you put it earlier, Dad, that, there has to be some sort of a confirmation after the sealing's taken place, even though, 27 years down the road, we never got that. And so now the family's not sealed together. I mean, I don't know. I just personally see a lot of inconsistencies that I just don't accept the explanations for that the Mormon Church gives. So,
but you still had to look at God and say, why is this happening? Or did you disconnect it at that point from being invested in your family status?
I don't understand the question. Did I feel a disconnect from being a member of the family?
No, did you blame God or wonder God, or did you just accept that it was, mom's choice or dad's choice, or, did it seem like a God thing to you or just a human thing, I guess?
No,
right?
No. In fact, when I would hear Mom saying how she'd prayed and she had felt that she got the confirmation through the Spirit that this is the right thing to do, I mean, honestly, I just felt that was her, finding a way to justify actions. I mean, honestly. And, I don't think that I don't feel that the Lord had given any confirmation one way or the other that was the case. But again, that was my view on it.
Wow, I'm just going to level with all of you who are listening to this right now. As I'm going through this, I'm not really sure if I'm going to publish this or not. I'm not really sure if this is a great idea or if it's not a great idea. But man, I listened to this last segment, and I don't think that I've ever really given my brother the credit that he deserves for just the choices that he's made in his life. So as I'm listening to him talk about the things that he saw, the inconsistencies that he saw in the church, in the stories, or the different reasons for why this is or why this isn't, that those just didn't make sense to him. I've never really had the conversation with him about what those things were or what that process was like. I always just assumed that, he wanted to be a rebellious teenager and all of the things that go along with that, and that's why he left the church. And that is pretty shitty of me. And so I do publicly want to say, I'm sorry, Jeff. I just called him too, because I'm listening to this. I'm like, I got to call my brother and tell him this. But, so maybe it would be helpful. I don't know. Because I listen back to the things that I say, not just on this podcast, but on every podcast. And I think, am I coming across as just an insufferable know-it-all? Oh, I hate that. I really, really hate that. If I'm like, this is the way that things are. So I'm really sensitive to that as I'm going through this, and using this as an exercise to try to better understand what I'm reading and learning from the Jonathan Haidt stuff, but also still evaluating it. And I know I've said I drank the Kool-Aid on it, and you can tell I think there's really something to this here, but I'm also still testing it out. And you guys are kind of my guinea pigs, I guess, in this laboratory environment of a podcast that we've created to throw out ideas and hash them out in discussions and things that continue from episode to episode, or comments that we get back from you on the website or other places. So anyway, the methodology that I'm doing right now, in going back and listening to this thing from 7 years ago, I haven't listened to it in probably 7 years. And, so in an ideal world, if this was like a professional podcast and we were doing this for real, I'd do a lot more research. I'd listen to everything. I'd figure out exactly what I want to say before I say it. And then I'd go in and I'd splice it into the different parts. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm listening to this, and in real time, when I feel inspired to say something, I'm cutting in and I'm saying it. And that might not be the best way to go about this, but that's the way I'm doing it. So I just want to let you know that's what's going on. And if you're listening to this going, what the hell is going on with Glenn? I don't know. I'm asking that question too. What the hell is going on with me? And trying to figure this stuff out. So I want to try this, and I don't know if this is right or not, but I was thinking about what my brother said about things not really making sense, and trying to link this back to the righteous mind, sense of morality, that my brother's moral framework, there was something about the church, even when he was 14, 15 years old, that it wasn't jiving with the way that he felt the world should be. And so this is his intuitions, his feelings, his elephant, right, that is leading him in directions against the church. And I wonder if one of the things that he was intuitively responding to was this fairness, reciprocity moral framework, where he was feeling like the things that the church were teaching weren't fair or weren't consistent, the answers that he was getting. And, again, not that you can really go in and articulate why you intuitively respond to something that you respond to, because any like everything that I'm saying right now, anything that he might give in response to a question as to why did you do that or why did you feel that, it's a post hoc rationalization. So we're trying to make sense of something that we did, but we don't always get it right. And so I'm wondering, is that what did it? That he saw that there were things that weren't fair and was an intuitive, natural response to that, even if you can't really articulate that's what's going on? I don't know. It's an interesting thought to me. And then how does that work with our family? Because he was the black sheep, the outlier. He was the first one of the 5 of us that left the church, and now everybody is out except for my dad. I don't know. It's interesting to think about. So I don't know, I'll go back to the recording. I just wanted to jump in and say all that.
But again, that was my view on it. And I also didn't, hold. I mean, I wasn't happy about it, but I realized that there was nothing I could do about it. And so, I had a choice at that point, either, go with it and love them, or, fight them and distance myself. And, I was already doing enough bad on my own that, I don't want to be fighting about something that I had no control over one way or the other. And I love my mother and I love my father, and, I was going to do what I could to make the best of it. And even when the next guy came in her life, I tried to, be friendly and make that work the best I could, even though it was tough.
Sure.
And I don't remember up to this point if we've really talked about my mom's second marriage. I know there's a piece that I cut out and I'm saving for an Easter egg that talks about it, but let's just say that my mom's second marriage didn't go very well, but her third marriage that she's on now is fantastic and has been for several years. So before John moves over and he asks me the question that he asked my sister and my brother that you've just heard response to, I had this thought about, again, trying to put all of this into a moral framework discussion and to ask the question, was my parents' divorce a moral act, or was it a violation? Did it violate the morals that my dad had, my mom had, my brother had, I had, my sister had? And I don't think there's a simple answer to say yes or no in any case. I think it is really one of those very frustrating, it depends kinds of answers. And it goes back to what Haidt talked about with the equalizer, that there's these different areas that can get triggered. Our moral framework, there's these 5 main areas, but the dial is turned up to different degrees of sensitivity on each one of them, and different people have different degrees of sensitivity.
I spent most of my life chasing after rainbows, and I know just how.
So again, a recap of what those 5 moral framework items are. There's the harm and the care, and we've already established that from the kids' perspective, there wasn't any harm that was happening as far as physical abuse or really even verbal abuse or emotional abuse. From my mom's perspective, she felt neglect and she felt a detachment. And so her experience in it, I think she felt that there was harm. But I think she was probably the only one of the 5 who was feeling that there was this impingement on her sense of morality, that she was being harmed, or that there was some harm going on due to neglect. The fairness, reciprocity, I don't know if that's a violation for anybody, but I know I sure felt like it wasn't fair. From my perspective, I think you can hear things that my sister has said where she didn't feel like it was fair, that we've been taught all these things, that family can be together forever. We've got this forever family. We thought these are the sorts of things that happen to other people, not us. And then it does. And we're like, wait a second, don't we get a say in whether our family's going to be splitting up? That's not fair. So there might have been on the kid's side, and maybe my dad as well, that this wasn't something that he really wanted. It's something that my mom initiated and drove. And so at the time, that we would have thought, oh, this isn't fair, and so that's impinging on our moral taste bud about fairness. I think the next one, in-group loyalty and betrayal, is probably the biggest thing, and I think every single one of us felt a sense of betrayal for different reasons and coming from different perspectives, but I think that betrayal was probably the biggest thing that we all felt in this. Authority and respect, I mean, you can hear there's I think the equalizer dial for authority and respect is probably turned up the highest on my dad, who has the most respect for authority. And I think you can hear that. I think it's at different places for the rest of us. And the purity and the sanctity, I'm not quite sure what to do with that one, but I'll keep that in mind as we listen to the rest of it. But kind of one of the things that I hope, if there are people that are listening along, that you have ideas or you have thoughts and you're like, oh yeah, what Glenn's saying doesn't really make sense, I think it's more on this side or this side, that you'll chime in on the comments, and I'd love to hear what you're saying and what you're thinking about it. So let's go back to the recording.
Sure. Okay. Well, Glenn, how about you? How did this affect your spiritual religious worldview?
It was probably pretty significant. I mean, there were several things that were going on in my spiritual religious worldview at the time. I was in graduate school when the bulk of this was happening, and I was studying folklore, and so I was looking at the way that tradition influences people's lives and creates meaning. And so, it kind of shows you the value of a folklore degree when my brother so articulately expressed his reaction to my mom, saying that this was received by revelation and going, oh, she's just using that as a way to justify. That was the message that I was being taught in folklore as well, is that, these stories that we have and create validation for our beliefs. And so I was studying this in an academic setting. I was looking at other cultures outside of Mormonism, and I was starting to look at Mormonism as being just one of other religious cultures. And so with this happening, it just made it more personal.
There was something else that I experienced as a graduate student that I didn't mention there, but also played a big role, not only in the way that I looked at the church, but also the way that I looked at my parents and their decision to divorce. There's a woman named Elizabeth Loftus, who is a professor somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. I forget exactly where. But she studies memory, and she's very well known, so some of you may have already heard of Elizabeth Loftus, know what she does. Probably the most well-known study that she did is called Lost in a Shopping Mall, where essentially her group of research graduate students would interview different people, and I think most of them were students at the university. And before, they would have regular interviews where maybe they'd meet with them every week or every other week, and they'd go through a list and say, let's just talk about events from your childhood. And before they would have these conversations with their subjects, they would contact, parents, siblings, friends of the subjects, and ask them about stories. And so, they would have a list of stories of things that actually happened to them, and then they'd ask the question, tell us what was going on here, and they would talk about the story. But they would also throw in some things that didn't happen, and they had confirmed ahead of time that it had never happened. And the one that they focused on for this study was being lost in a shopping mall. And, so they're saying, tell us about the time you went to the beach, tell us about the time you went to Disneyland, now tell us about the time you were lost in a shopping mall. And what they saw over time is that, initially the first couple of times, the subject would say, oh, I don't remember that at all. And okay, fine, they move on to the next thing. But then they go back the next week and ask the series of questions again, and from week to week to week, a story started developing. Because what they were doing is they were trying to, they believed, okay, well, if this is being asked, it must have actually happened. So I probably have this memory somewhere in my brain. Let's go find it. Oh, I think this is it. And details would start to develop. Oh, I remember there was a guy who found me, and he was wearing a red plaid flannel shirt, and I remember the sound of the voice that came over the speaker system saying that I was looking for my mom, and I remember going out for ice cream after they found us. So all of these details of this experience that never actually happened started forming a narrative. And so Elizabeth Loftus was able to show that memories are malleable and can be, not that every single one of them are, but can be changed and flawed, and just because somebody remembers something one way doesn't mean that that's actually what it happened. So she came to Indiana University and gave a lecture, and that was hugely impactful on me. It changed the way, let's not say that it changed the way, because it didn't happen just boom overnight, but it influenced the way that I interpreted things like the multiple versions of the first vision narrative, or any kind of personal experience story that someone would say over the pulpit during a testimony to validate the church, or tithing, or, it made me think about my own stories, my own personal narratives, and wondering how much of this really happened to me and how much did I create this detail as a way to say, yeah, and I paid my tithing and then I ended up this happening, so here's proof that tithing happens. Because as a folklorist, I learned that there is a tale type. There are certain elements of stories that we learn how to tell stories, and there's certain expectations that our audience members have. So when we're telling a story, we try to meet those expectations, and stories can, you could go through a story and kind of outline, here's where this is happening, here's where this is happening, and it's pretty consistent that we have this structure that's a traditional structure for personal narratives, but filling in the details on those structures, because we know there's an expectation for faith-affirming stories in Mormonism. So do we manufacture things to fit those expectations? I think absolutely we do. And it was Elizabeth Loftus and her study of memory that came in that made me really think about that. So that was really influential. And then in applying it, obviously, to my parents, when they're talking about 24 years earlier when they got married, what was happening, how reliable are those stories? And clearly my mom has an agenda that she wants the marriage to be over, and so the stories that she tells are going to be stories that support that agenda. And my dad has his agenda. He doesn't want the marriage to be over, so his stories and his memories are going to support that. So that played a really big role too, and I didn't mention it in here, so I wanted to make sure that I got it the second time around.
It just made it more personal to me, and just looking at the way that religion, even listening to my dad a few minutes ago going into the scriptures as a way to explain what had happened, just seeing how we use these religious stories to justify and make sense of the world. So I started going from a more literal interpretation of religion to a more figurative interpretation of religion, and so it was definitely key in that.
Sure. And for me, one of my most painful times with all of this was during Missy's endowment, when we were all in the temple together except for Jeff, and just the realization that my mom's on one side, my dad's on the other side, and neither the twain shall meet, even though they're both there. And it was like almost complete, almost together in the temple where it's supposed to be. And you're supposed to go into the celestial room and have this marvelous communion experience as a family, and I just felt the lack of that, and it was really painful for me emotionally, and I didn't quite know how to express it in that sense.
So for you, it was sort of a blow to the early stages of your faith. Or the early form of your faith.
It was a burden that I wouldn't call it a blow, but I'd say it was a burden that I had to shoulder and I had to carry. And, to hear, like Jeff said, there were a lot of inconsistencies, and I started seeing the inconsistencies as well. And I love my dad and I love my mom, and hearing their sides of it, that they both felt that they had God on their side. And it would have been a lot easier if one of them would have left the church. It would have been so much easier, but they both stayed true to it. And, being raised with this binary worldview of there's either right or there's wrong, it was it was confusing. What does this mean? So it was a burden, but I wouldn't say it was devastating by any means. I'm grateful that I had to struggle through those questions, and I'm happy with where I am as a result of it. But it wasn't fun. It wasn't anything I would have wished for at the time.
Sure. Mom, did you get your doctorate after the divorce?
Yes.
So you went back to school.
Well, I was in process.
Yeah.
I was in process of, it was actually going to school was one of the ways I was trying to cope with still being married.
Sure.
I was hoping that would help me stay.
Well, an interesting side note, possibly. I always remember her going to school. I mean, all of my growing up years, I remember her being gone and at school. And at the time when I couldn't spiritually justify what was happening to my family, I blamed a lot of it on her schooling. And I just kind of thought she had some crazy ideas or met some people that, were Satan's people, tried to take her away and put ideas in her head. And
yes, of course.
I will confirm that thought and suspicion as well, although I didn't think that it was as much of people putting stuff in her mind as the fact that what she was filling her head with was psychobabble. Just to, again, justify actions and,
Well, I've shared this with you before, Mom. I don't know if you remember the day, but I remember going to your office with you at ASU, and I can't remember specifics of if you guys were already officially divorced or if it was separated, but I remember going to your office and you had to leave for something. I just kind of sat at your desk and kind of crawled up, and I just started crying. I just felt so kind of creepy there and just sad and depressed. There just was not a good energy there. And maybe that was my own mind, creating that so that I could have a place of blame or something. But it felt very real to me at the time.
Graduate programs can be very lonely. You were probably picking that up on that.
Yeah.
And Mom, you were just trying to find fulfillment and satisfaction and maybe, cope. Is that kind of what?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
I was. I mean, I recognize that it isn't possible to demand that one person meet your needs. I mean, that's just not possible to expect that of a husband. And so I was trying to find ways that were appropriate to meet my needs and see if I could do it.
Right. Okay, Dad, tell us your perspective on how ward members or family members can help or not help.
Well, we'll start with home teacher, I guess. We had a home teacher that lived down the street, been our home teacher for several years. I worked with him in a state calling. Mom worked with his wife in Relief Society. And when the separation occurred and then all the way through the divorce, these people kept very close contact with me and were very supporting and loving and non-judgmental. The ward as a whole, as far as I was concerned, was supportive. I felt very ostracized is not the word, but left out, not because people were intentionally leaving me out, but that because the flow of the church, the mainstream of the church, is so focused on families that if you're not a family, you're kind of left out.
Sure.
I had 2 or 3 experiences, interesting experience. I had a single cousin who took me to a single adult dance, and I walked into that place, and it's the Walking Wounded story. I walked into that dance, and I said, these people, these are the Walking Wounded. That was my first reaction. These people are the Walking Wounded. My second reaction was, and I'm one of them. I wasn't ready to be in that place, and I never went back to another singles dance. I went to church one Sunday, and a couple came up to me and they said, "Oh, we're so glad to see you in church today." And I said, "Why? I mean, why today? Where else would you expect me to be? This is Sunday, and this is sacrament meeting. This is where I'm supposed to." "Well, but you're getting divorced and things are blah blah blah." And we just kind of figured maybe you'd, not want to stay with the church. I thought, that's kind of silly. Where else would I go?
Where will you go? What will you do?
I had differing experiences as a single person, and I don't think the church deals real well with single people. I happen to presently be in a bishopric in a university ward, and the church is reaching out and trying to integrate on various levels single people and attend to their needs on a single person basis, as opposed to trying to attend to single people in a traditional family ward. So,
right. Okay.
Melissa and I were living in the family home, the two of us, for a year or so. Jeff and his wife moved in with us.
Well, she wasn't his wife yet.
No, for a better part of a year, Jeff.
Something like that.
While she was pregnant with your son, the son was actually born while they were living in the home, and I guess you stayed with us for another 3 or 4 months before you moved. So we had a kind of a family, but it wasn't a complete family. And it was, in some respects, I guess we could quote Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times.
Except minus the best part.
Well, it was. I think it was kind of the best of times in many respects, Missy, because you and I got very close, and
okay, I'll give you that.
And it was kind of the best of times as well, because we got close with Jeff and Tammy, at least as close to Tammy as Tammy let us get. And then there was Curtis, who came along, and he was great. So yeah, there were good things that were going on, but they weren't traditional things, and they weren't the best of things. So from a standpoint of, did people in the ward help me? Yeah, many of them tried to help a lot. Did people try to hurt or interfere? No, I don't remember that.
I'll just say that was absolutely my experience. The one thing you said about, well, two things. I had fantastic home teachers, but I got closer to my parents than I think I ever would have gotten if they had stayed together. And that, for me, was this bizarre, wonderful side benefit of divorce. Did Glenn and Jeff, did you experience something similar?
Yeah. I mean, for me, moving in with Dad, being able to live there, while, I guess kind of under a black cloud, I brought in my not wife, pregnant with my son, my girlfriend living in my house, and not really a traditional Mormon setting.
But maybe for the record, we should state that Tammy was downstairs and you were upstairs. Even though the damage had been done. Dad wouldn't allow it in his home.
We tried to have a semblance of what I thought was propriety under the circumstances.
Really? I don't remember that.
Oh, my.
I don't remember you.
First then, but,
I don't remember you staying downstairs or upstairs, but I do remember trying to set that up.
Yeah, no, I'm just playing. But yeah, no, I mean, at first it wasn't. I wasn't getting as close with Mom. I mean, she had moved out. We were living at the house. She was in her, as we had called it, Barbie dream house. Is that what it was? Is that what it was, guys?
Yeah, that's what it was called.
Okay. And and doing her thing, and we were. I was not. I guess I don't think I was all that close to the family as a whole growing up in the first place. As Missy had stated earlier, my recollection of, my youth, I remember going on some excellent vacations and spending a lot of time. And I remember car rides. I remember going up to Canada and driving up there and back, and lots of good stuff. But, with the daily grind, I remember that, Mom was at school pretty much all the time. I remember, being able to take off during assemblies and go home with my friends and ditch school and things like that. And I'd be able to do that because nobody was there. I remember that, when Dad would come home, he would engulf himself in the in Scripture and and read, and then watch a little Star Trek and do his ironing. And there wasn't a whole lot of
clean the pool.
Yeah, well, that was Saturdays, but I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of family interaction other than on a Monday night for family home evening, and even then, we wouldn't even be able to watch Ferris Bueller's.
Oh yeah.
Well, we watched part of it.
We got
turned
like
off,
the first 5 minutes. Yeah. So, no. But
sorry you had such a deprived childhood.
Oh, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying,
And
that
we left out some of the good parts.
I wanted to say that there was lots of good parts, but there was also a lot of, I felt disconnect, and I didn't feel that I really got closer with my mother and my father until later on in life. And, I don't know how all that would have played out if they would have stayed together, but I feel that I have a really good relationship with the both of them, even though I'm out here in California. Mom's there in Utah, Dad's in Phoenix. So, I mean, it's tough, but I think we do a good job making it work, even with the distance. And I don't know.
Well, one of the days I'll never forget is when I was a student at BYU, and I got the letter from my mom, I believe, telling me that the ceiling was canceled. Mom or Dad, who was the person who initiated that process of getting the ceiling canceled?
I was when I was sealed again. So I needed to do that. He was sealed prior to that, and that wasn't a requirement at that time to go through anything like that. Well, I can't remember. I don't think there was. And so because it's different,
it wasn't.
Yeah, the different for men and women. So when I was going to be sealed again, then I needed to have that sealing undone.
What was that? Can you just talk us through that process of annulling or canceling a sealing?
Actually, it was quite I'm told, a really amazing process with it, because it didn't take very long, for one thing. And it just is, they asked me to write a letter of my experience, and then we had to have letters. And I had been married for a brief time in between and had to have a letter from him, even though there had been no sealing there. And then my bishop and stake president and that sort of thing. And they wrote in, and then within 2 weeks I had a response, and it was canceled.
Very quick.
I'd like to tackle this.
Very quick and painless.
Yeah, pretty much.
And Papa, for you, before we come to Melissa, anything you'd add to that?
No.
Okay.
Dad, was there even any little bit of spite in you that thought, even just for a second, I'm not going to sign it. I'm not going to. No. Okay.
No. My thought was that, all right, this didn't work out with your mother. Well, I didn't feel that there was any purpose in my trying to be vindictive towards her, and hopefully you kids have never heard me say anything malicious or bad about her. That never was a goal of mine or a thought of mine. If she could be remarried and sealed to someone that made her happy, great. because I was remarried and sealed to somebody that made me happy. I didn't wish her any unhappiness. So no, there was never a thought in my mind about not signing or authoring a letter that would assist in her achieving a cancellation so that she could be sealed to her current husband.
And Dad, you didn't have to go through a special application process to get remarried, is that right?
No, I did. The process for a man to be remarried in the temple is similar to the process for the cancellation of the sealing, except it stops short of the cancellation of the sealing. You still have to have a letter from your bishop and your stake president. You have to write a letter, and the spouse is invited to write a letter as well. So the process, as I understand it, is pretty much the same. The result is different. For a man, the result is that you get a letter from the first presidency that authorizes you to be sealed to the second spouse in the temple without the cancellation of the first sealing.
Oh.
For a woman, or to put it differently, a man can be sealed to more than one woman at one time. Can't be civilly married to more than one woman at a time, but you can be sealed with the earlier marriage having been terminated through lawful divorce. But for a woman, she can't be sealed to more than one man at a time. And so for Mom to be sealed to her current husband, the sealing between she and I had to be canceled. And so that's the difference, the result in this process. I achieved or received permission to be sealed to a second woman. She received a cancellation of the first sealing.
And Dad, if I understand your understanding of this, it's not really the sealing that was canceled, but it's the promise of sealing, right? That marriage ceremony is the promise of sealing, but the actual sealing happens later. So I would imagine that at the time that you were sealed to two women, you didn't really see it as being sealed to two women. You didn't have any thoughts of like a shared afterlife together. It was just more of a technicality, like the promise of sealing, but that first promise had already been broken, so it didn't really mean anything there.
You're absolutely correct. The temple marriage ceremony isn't effective as a sealing right that instant. It takes a long time, and unless you endure to the end and do other things, you're not going to get that sealing isn't going to get completed. And I never did feel after the first 20 or so years, and as a result of the divorce, that your mother and I were actually sealed in that ultimate sense. We had gone through the process. We had the potential, but it hadn't been realized. And so the cancellation of the sealing was the cancellation of the possibility.
Right. And Dad, this is sort of a tangent, but since we're on the topic and I'm just curious, knowing that you're kind of a devout believer, do you believe that in heaven there is plural marriage?
When I get there and find out, I'll try and let you know.
Okay, so for you, it's just a big question mark.
Yeah, I don't have any. I don't know. I can see examples in the scriptures where it's entirely possible. It certainly apparently has been the process at points in time in history. It's also been not the process and not accepted at other points in time in history. So
for you, it's kind of a question mark.
I can give you the answer. My kids will laugh, but there is a scripture that I can direct you to that gives you the answer to that.
By laugh, you mean groan, right?
Alma, yeah, groan. Alma chapter 37, verse 11. Which says, these mysteries are not yet made fully known unto me, therefore I shall forbear.
Yeah, I had to grow up with this kind of stuff. I can't tell you how many times I heard my dad pull out that scripture as a way of saying, oh, I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate on this. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to be mean to my dad, but it's interesting the things that he does speculate on and then where he draws the line. And you want to know at what point we turned off Ferris Bueller in family home evening?
Pardon my French, but Cameron is so tight that if you stuck a lump of coal up his ass, in 2 weeks you'd have a diamond.
Yep, that was it. My dad's move is, okay, and then it was done.
Okay, so I believe that Melissa was going to jump in and share some of her feelings about the cancellation of the sealing.
Yes, just like you, John, I remember vividly where I was. I mean, and granted, this wasn't that long ago. Mom and her current husband have only been married 3.5 years, so I mean, this probably happened about 4 years ago. Anyways, I remember I was driving home, and I can picture the spot in the neighborhood and these beautiful trees. I live in the Midwest, not in Arizona anymore. It's beautiful. But anyway, so I remember specifically where I was, and I got this phone call and just this excited voice on the other end, and, oh, you'll never guess what came in the mail today. I just got the letter of the temple sealing cancellation, and I'm so excited because usually it takes such a long time, and isn't that great?
Mom, is she exaggerating?
Probably not. I was probably clueless.
Oh, okay. Keep going, Melissa.
I'll bear that one.
Well, and we've talked about this since, so it's, it's not calling her out, something that she doesn't already know my experience on. But I just, I almost had to pull over. I was so sad. And I just said, Mom, I don't need to take away any bit of your happiness, but maybe you should kind of consider who you're talking to and what this means for me. And, maybe word things a little bit differently, or kind of, be a little more sensitive of what, what's going on. And that was just really hard for me. I kind of hadn't, it kind of hadn't realized how real it all was, even though they both were remarried, and I'm very happy with who they're married to now. I myself, was sealed in the temple and had a good family life, but it just kind of hit me like, wow, that family is gone. And, I don't know if this is the time we want to talk about, actually when she was sealed again. I guess it probably fits, but, I wasn't endowed when Dad and his current wife were sealed. So obviously I wasn't there, but I was there when Mom was sealed again. And that was really hard for me. I remember being in that room, the same room that my husband and I were sealed in, and just listening to, what's the name of the guy? It's the sealer? Is it just the sealer?
Well, you don't need to say that. No, not his personal name, but just like the person who does the sealing. He's just the sealer. Listening to him and the things that he was saying, and just being in that room, and like the idea that I felt was like that this was almost destined for Mom and her husband to be together, and that everything that they had done in their lives, because they had been righteous and kept strong to their their faith and all that the church teaches us, that they were brought to this point because of their righteousness. And I just kind of had to think like, well, wait a minute. I take issue with that. My family had to break up for this to happen. And as much as I don't begrudge them their happiness, I'm very happy. But I just can't agree that this has all been destined to happen this way. And I started feeling really kind of bitter, which obviously isn't a very good thing to feel at the temple. But, and I've shared this with all of my family. That was really kind of the first time where I allowed myself to think, what is this really all about? And of course I had questioned things of the church before, but I always kind of had a neat little box to put it back in, some sort of an answer that, whether it completely satisfied me or not, I was able to kind of get by and put those things on the shelf. And just being there watching Mom be sealed again in that room really opened up a can of worms for me. And since that time, the can is just, maybe Pandora's box.
And Missy, at that time, if I remember right, you didn't feel like Mom deserved that happiness. Like you wanted to see some blood, right?
Well, I think there was part of me, part of the bitterness of that was that this was all just too great. But then, as Mom had mentioned, she was married a second time, and I don't know, that was kind of the blood. Like I said, I genuinely was happy for her, and But yeah, at the same time, I just was kind of really resentful that this, blessed union happened at the expense of my family. And
yeah, I'm going to jump in here real quick and state another hashtag obvious thing. But it's the loyalty betrayal thing that's being triggered here in her, right? That, all of her life she had been taught, this is your forever family. And then all of a sudden it's not. And then starting to hear the same people that told her that this one family was her forever family, and now the institution's telling her that this other thing is the forever family, or, that it was all meant to be this way. I'm really glad that Missy shared that. And I think it speaks to that hurt. And she absolutely was angry. She wanted to punish those people, just like, Jonathan Haidt talked about the game that was played where people were allowed to punish people who weren't playing by the rules. And, wow, they started contributing a lot more when you could punish. There is that drive to send a message to people who violate your moral code. And I think that's what Missy was experiencing at that point.
Hashtag duh.
Hashtag duh.
Anyways, yeah, I've had a lot of struggles with the church and just with different, with my faith since then.
So for you, that was a blow to your testimony?
Yeah, because if, the magic of the ceiling, the magic of the temple was kind of lost for me. And I know everybody can interpret things their own way, but for me, feeling that and being there, I just didn't get it anymore. Like Dad was saying, I guess if there's a promise, what's the point of living your life this way? Your whole, everything is about families. It's about, from a very young age, even, last Sunday I heard a baby blessing, and they were blessing this baby that they would be able to find an eternal mate to take them to the temple. And I thought, well, what's the big deal if they can just cancel it and have a do-over? What all this importance placed on the temple if it really isn't, for lack of a better word, magic? And I know that's, a completely different conversation for another day. It's just my feelings and how I perceived it and dealt with it. But yeah, and when you kind of take away special things that happen at the temple, your whole religious world could fall apart.
Well, actually, I think this is the perfect time and place to discuss this. And Glenn, I think that what I'm going to be voicing here, I've heard you voice as well. And there's this tendency we have in the church to say, here's how it should be, and here's how we need to live, and let's all live that way. And then life happens, and someone commits suicide, or a sealed temple marriage breaks up, or a promise that was made in a patriarchal blessing doesn't come to pass. And the common Mormon reaction that I've experienced is, well, it'll all get worked out in heaven. And, that's kind of the big catch-all. And that's fine. That's actually how I look at a lot of things too. But in the end, how do you simultaneously remain invested in the literalness and the high standards when you know that a ceiling can be easily dissolved and people can get remarried, and in the end it'll all work out someday?
Right. So then what's with, what is it? Why do we really have the temple? If it's all going to work out someday in heaven, then why do we have to do these symbolic things? I can see how it can benefit us in a temporal state. Definitely can bless our lives to be worthy, to be, able to attend the temple, and the promises that you make there are really good things about being a good person, but you can still be a good person and not be a temple-going person. Like that's kind of where I have struggles, because, if it all is going to work out in heaven anyways, then...
Glenn, why don't you jump in here?
Oh, boy. I don't really know where to start with that, John. I think as far as my parents' divorce and its impact on my life is concerned, I did start looking at ordinances and priesthood powers and things like this much less literally. And to answer your question, why go through all this if it's just symbolic? Well, I think there's lessons to be learned. If you can use this mortal probation, if that's what this earth is. It's a mortal probation, and it's a time to gain experience. Being in a broken family, or being in a hard marriage, or going to church on Sundays and hearing messages that make you want to pull your hair out can be a place to gain some strength and perspective if that's what you want to do, and if you're really getting something out of it. But not that this is the only way that you can learn those lessons, and in fact, maybe sometimes they're an inhibitor to learning these lessons. If you're using the ordinances and the symbols of the church to support self-righteous pride, that's when I've got a real problem with it, or to say, I don't have any reasons to be humble. I don't have any reasons to accept this because everything's guaranteed for me because I did this thing. That's where I kind of have a problem with it. And so maybe the divorce, forcing me to look at those things, helped me get to a place where I'm a little more comfortable being in a non-literal place, and I can still go to church, and I can still go through the temple, and I can still be worthy for these things, whatever that means to be worthy, just because I feel comfortable.
Now I want to break in again here, because I kind of remember, again, this is 7 years ago, but I can kind of remember what I was feeling when I was saying all these things, because it was a tricky position to be in, and obviously it's one that I put myself in because I arranged all of this. But so at this time I was still going to church. I was semi-active. I'd go to sacrament meeting and then go home. But probably at this point I was teaching my daughter's primary class too, and she was getting ready to be baptized, or maybe she had just been baptized, and so I was doing everything that I needed to do to be worthy, and I put that word in air quotes because I hated it even back then. I hated the word worthy. I hated the idea that you have to do these things to have any worth, and if you don't do these things, then you're not worthy, or you're basically worth less, which is just so horrible to even think about, calling people worthless because of this or that. So I hadn't... I hadn't taken off my garments at this point. I was still wearing garments. Probably still had a temple recommend. I was obeying the word of wisdom, paying tithing, doing all these things. But I was 1 foot in, 1 foot out, very much like New Order Mormon type of Mormon. And so I had to be careful, and I tried to use that as a way to talk to my dad and my mom in language that they understood and they were comfortable with, and even if I didn't quite agree with, so like I said something here now about being worthy, and I know that meant something different to them than it meant to me, because I thought that as long as you feel like you're worthy, and temple attendance, if you go into the temple and you're not worthy, you've lied about it, then that responsibility isn't on the bishop who gave you the recommend, or the stake president who gave you the recommend. It's on you. So if you're the one responsible for it, then what does it matter? You just say, I'm worthy because I think I'm worth what it takes to go into this place and do this thing. And you take that personal responsibility, and then if there is a God and he calls foul on that, I'll raise my hand and go, yeah, that was on me. That was my bad. And that was a big change for me, by the way, being able to think about that. And then I stopped feeling like I had to come clean and confess everything to bishops, that they were some intermediary between me and God, when I had a strong belief that there was a God. So anyway, all the things that I'm saying right here at this point in the recording, I listened back to it and I'm like, wow, that's kind of strange. But then, 7 years ago, I was still going to church. I hadn't stopped entirely. That would all happen within a year from the time that this was recorded. But anyway, back to that recording. With it. And I don't have to believe it literally, and I don't even have to feel like maybe I fit in with everybody that's around me, but I can still see, for my family, for my wife, for my kids,
this is something that hopefully will be good for us. That sounds like I just spun around a lot. I don't know if I made any sense. Yeah.
You did.
Which one? Spun around or made sense? Yeah,
Both.
Thanks.
Well, why don't we have Dad help, Dad and then Mom as both the still strong believers in the church. I didn't ask this question with disrespect. It's a natural question. I hope you guys would see it as a fair one. If things can just be worked out in the end, whether it's, people who don't get baptized on this earth or temple marriages or whatever, and if the celestial temple marriages can be easily dissolved, how do we still maintain, sort of the strong feeling that they're literal and super important versus flexible, and then in the end God's going to make it all okay anyway, so we don't need to be too worked up about them.
Okay, well, start with, I disagree with part of your premise. I don't think temple cancellations are all that easy to obtain. They are obtainable, and the mere fact that they're obtainable, I guess, renders the are they easy or are they difficult a minor question. But let me try and address your concern or answer the question. For me, my answer may not make sense to my kids or Mom or even you, but it's my answer. I believe that we are here on this earth to gain experience and to it is a test. It's a probationary period. I believe that not merely because the scriptures tell me that, but because it appears to me to be that way as my life has unfolded. I learn things. I make mistakes. I learn things. I make more mistakes. I learn more things. And as I learn and as I grow, I think I become better. That may sound egotistical, and I don't mean it that way, but I learn things, and I learn how to do things better than I knew how to do them before, and in that context, I become a little better. And I accept the concept that this life being a test and being a proving ground, that if I do the best I can in following the principles and precepts of the gospel, I will have so much to benefit for it in the life to come. I look at where I am in life today, and I say, why am I where I am? Why wasn't I born in China? Why am I not North Korean? Why am I not, any number of other things? Why am I a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? I'm less than, 1/10 of 1% of the population of the world? Is there some reason why I'm where I am, or is it all just chance? Well, I choose to believe that there's a reason for why I'm where I am, and that reason goes back to the preexistence and things that I did there. Well, if what I did in the preexistence has influenced where I am and what I am in this life, then what I do in this life is going to influence where I am and what I am in the next part of my life, the spirit world, the next existence, whatever you want to call it. And so, whereas, there are things like temple cancellations and Missy's word do-overs. They're not without expense. They're not without cost. They're not without a loss. They come with a price. And the more you can avoid those negative prices, the better off you'll be. But if things occur and there is a divorce in the family, it's not the end of the world. Things can be rehabilitated. And families, I think, can be forever. I don't know how that's going to work in the post-existence. I certainly don't think we're all going to live in the same house. I don't think Glenn would want to live in my house with his wife and his children any more than Melissa would want to live in my house with her husband and her children, but yet we want to be together in some fashion. And Jeff, I don't know, maybe Jeff does want to live in my house with his children.
He wants to be able to go downstairs, Dad.
Oh, my.
With my new girlfriend.
The point is that I don't know how it's going to work out in the hereafter, and I recognize that people could say it's just a giant cop-out to say, I don't know, but I choose to accept. But that's tough for them. I don't know, and I do choose to accept. And I think that what I do in this life is going to influence where I am and what I do in the next life. And the better I can do things here, the closer I can adhere to the principles of the gospel, not the church, but the gospel, the better off I'll be in the next life. And so
I'd like to.
That's how I answer.
I'd like to address just one thing that you said in there, Dad, where I see a little bit of inconsistency or confusion. And you talk about the value in making mistakes and learning things, and making mistakes and learning things, and making mistakes and learning things. And I'm completely with you on that. But I feel like our family, and by extension, I think the church as well, really avoids putting any value into making mistakes. And, you kind of put that at the end of your argument where you were talking about trying to avoid the ill effects of making mistakes as much as possible. If you make a mistake and you learn, you make a mistake and you learn. I'm not saying we should encourage people to go out and sin, but it seems like that if it's not a safe environment to really talk about what those mistakes are and to really get in and explore those mistakes, define them, own them, and really move on, then we're kind of in a holding pattern. And that's been part of my frustration as we're looking back 13 years on the divorce, that as a group, we may never come to a common understanding of what these mistakes were or how they were, but how much of that can we do so that we can learn from it, and so that as much as possible, my kids can benefit from that. Although it's no replacement for experience. But so if we're here to make mistakes and to learn things, why can't we talk more about those mistakes in an open, honest, safe way?
Well, first off, we're not here specifically to make mistakes. We're here to learn things. And in the process of learning things, we're going to make mistakes. And if you don't understand the concept of repentance in the face of making mistakes, I guess you don't understand the concept of the atonement either. Because the atonement is there specifically because we do make mistakes. Yeah. And it's there to bridge that.
That's why I think that we are here to make mistakes.
Well, I don't think we're here to make mistakes so that the atonement has meaning. The atonement's going to have meaning because
we're sent here to make mistakes.
Of who and what we are. No, we're not.
We're sent here to try to be perfect, and that's why we have the atonement.
We're sent. Yes, Melissa, that's exactly correct. We are sent here to become as close to Christ as we possibly can become. We are to become, as we are taught both in the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, as well as the Mormon scriptures, that we are to become like Christ. So we're to become like God in Christ. And in order to do that, we've got to understand principles of the gospel and obey those principles of the gospel. But we're human, we're weak, we know what we should do and do other things notwithstanding. And so we're going to sin. And that's where Christ and the atonement and repentance comes in.
So Glenn and Melissa, am I hearing you guys say two things that maybe you guys wish that there was a little more charity towards mistake making, a little more support for mistake making, maybe not so much as a horrible thing, but almost as a virtue, and a bit of a distancing from perfectionism? Is that what I'm hearing from you guys?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You too, Melissa?
So you don't have any desire to to become better?
No,
I don't know how you're getting to that
I have a hard
point.
time.
I don't know how you connect those dots.
I just think that there's so much in the world to learn from. I have a hard time believing that through the LDS Church, in what a big, I mean, just even like Dad was saying, why did he come to where he is? Why wasn't he born in China? What about the people who were born in China? What about the people who were there before missionaries were able to come? I think there's so much pressure put on the LDS faith and the members therein to try to be perfect. And there's just so many other ways of being a good person and living a good life that if you choose to follow what the church teaches, that's great. And you'll be blessed for your faith, but I just think I'm not articulating well what I want to say. Basically, I think there's just a lot of added pressure, and it would be nice to be in a world where there's not so much pressure and a little more compassion and love and everything. It feels like in the church, a lot of times it feels like in the church, everything has an absolute, that it's not. Jeff, do you want to add something? I could feel you.
Guess, yeah, I was like just about to interrupt. It just seems to me that one of the baseline teachings with the Mormon faith is that you can only come to God into the celestial kingdom through the one and only true church on this earth. I find that a very arrogant statement and really hard to believe that it's the only way to be saved, and that's to be Mormon. That's pretty hard line, and I don't think we need to take away from people who do believe that, because that's their tradition. That's what's important to them. And I think that's wonderful. But I just think there should be a little bit more compassion for people who don't see things quite that way.
And I don't know how you go from compassion to not wanting to be perfect or not wanting to be better.
Well, it's just that, because you're saying if you don't want to do these things, if you don't want to, keep the word of wisdom, then you don't want to be perfect. You don't want to be like Christ. And that's like a simple thing. But if somebody's making these choices, it's a judgment automatically, just even like you kind of threw that out there, like you don't want to be better. Of course I want to be better. I want to be a good person. I want to be a loving.
And I'm the only person that's not allowed to play devil's advocate? I'm the only person that's not allowed to throw something out for the conversation's point of view. Glenn, you're allowed to do it, but I'm not.
No, that's fine. So
don't be defensive. We're having a conversation.
Don't be defensive.
So this is probably the portion of this conversation from 7 years ago that most made me want to come back into it and look at it through the Jonathan Haidt moral framework questions. And I remember when this came out, and you can go to the Mormon Stories website and see some of the comments, they're still there. People were really uncomfortable during this section, when at least some people were. I like it. When clearly my brother, my sister, and I are saying one thing, my dad's saying another, my mom's kind of quiet through the whole thing. But can you hear where each one of us are coming from a different equalizer setting of these 5 moral framework areas, where like my sister is talking about things that harm other people, that it's too much pressure and that's harmful to people, and that it's not fair. So you got the harm care, then we've also got the fairness thing. It's not fair. My brother saying that the one true church is really arrogant. It's, that's not fair. That's not a good way to be. That's where he's coming from. But my dad, he keeps referring back to scripture, so he's going into that authority. He's offended that we're not respecting the authority of the scriptures. He's offended that we're not being loyal to him. We're challenging him, we're questioning him, and he feels it very personally. And you hear him say, "Oh, of course not. No, I'm not going to get defensive." Why is that? Because he feels like his values are being attacked, because they are. We are doing that. And the things that he would want kept pure and unpolluted, the beliefs of the church. Here we're coming in and we're polluting them with these kind of liberal, worldly ideas about fairness and harm, and so we're really at different places on this. But none of us are coming at this from an immoral point of view, so that we do have more in common than we're actually talking about here. And this is the big challenge, not just for this conversation, for others. When people see things so differently, when the equalizers of moral framework are so different, how do you deal with those differences and actually come to some kind of productive middle ground? I don't know how to do that. Obviously, not by mocking, but I'm able to have fun with you guys through that. So anyway, let's go back to the conversation, and maybe I'm kind of toying with this idea of doing sound effects for each one of these 5 things, and every time one of us says something in the upcoming conversation, I'd play that sound effect. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that or not. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, we've had this conversation many times before.
Well, let's have Dad summarize what he feels, just in balance. I think I see where Glenn and Melissa are coming from, and Jeff, that there's a virtue in eschewing perfectionism and taking some of the pressure off, so that people can enjoy things more and not feel so much stress. Sometimes stress and pressure can cause people to excel and do great things, and sometimes it can cause them to crack.
All right, that's going to be the harm care sound effect. Ouch, from the Ruddles.
And buckle and get depressed and be miserable. And I'm guessing the mom and dad would agree with some of that. And I'm guessing the dad's going to say that standards are good and important.
And that is the authority respect sound effect.
And we should strive for them. But he's also already said that mistakes, you can learn from them, and we're all going to make them, and that's just a reality in life. So, Dad, since you said you were playing devil's advocate...
And that's the bullshit sound effect, because my dad was not playing devil's advocate.
Is there any summary you want to make that sort of represents how you synthesize what's been discussed? And then we'll ask Mom.
Well, I think you summarized it fairly well. I do believe that there are standards, and that there need to be standards. There is a right and there is a wrong.
It's right.
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I may be wrong about this, but I'm going to say that this is the purity sanctity thing, because wrong pollutes right. Maybe? Maybe. Oh, let's just go with it, and you can correct me in the comments.
I would prefer to find myself on the correct side of right than on the incorrect side, on the wrong side.
And I'm proud to be an American.
And this is going to be the loyalty/betrayal sound effect, because, and again, this may be a bit of a stretch, but he's saying he wants to be on the right side with the group that's taught him what right is. And so to me, that's being him loyal to his group. Did I just say being him loyal? He's expressing loyalty. That's where he wants to be. Hannah. So that's the sound effect.
I also recognize that being overly concerned about some things, nobody's going to like what I have to say, so why should I say it?
So he's getting ready here to provide what you might think of as a conservative's critique of liberal-minded people having the equalizer turned up way too high on the harm and care mode of morality. What you're going to hear him say is that people can care too much about people being harmed, and compassion's a good thing, but you can take it too far. So I think this is a really good point that he brings up here, and illustrates very nicely the difference between someone who does have harm care as part of their moral framework, but it's not as important as the other things as well. It's more balanced with the others.
Nobody's going to like what I have to say, so why should I say it?
No, say it, Papa.
It's just, you're not going to accept it. So, all right, I think it's counterproductive to be hung up on things that either you don't understand or can't understand or don't want to understand.
Right.
Compassion is a great thing. And having compassion, I don't see the church or see the church leaders as non-compassionate people. I see them as extremely compassionate people. I see teachings of the church that they're trying to teach us and help us be more compassionate.
You know what? I think he's right. I think that the church leaders really do care about compassion. They do care about this moral framework, compassion and harm. But there's something else that Jonathan Haidt said, that there are people who care about it, but if some people on the fringes have to be hurt in order to maintain order in a society, then that's an acceptable loss, casualty. I think that's where having the equalizer turned up higher on the harm care for people that are more liberally minded, if we're going to accept that, than people who still have the harm care meter, but it's not turned up as high and it's balanced out by the other things. I think that might be why we talk past each other, maybe. So just to illustrate and to try and articulate what's in my mind right now, I'm thinking about homosexual members of the church.
There are no homosexual members of the church.
Shut up, Richard.
And the way that messages, when we just recently read this, when we were smacking down the document that was leaked, the guidelines to common questions, that in all of the literature, and the messages that you get in the church is that we love gay people. We're compassionate towards gay people. Now, they're not really. I mean, so it's not like a black and a white thing where either you are or you aren't. I think those of us who are critical of church leaders here would say you're not compassionate enough and you're turning a blind eye to all of the harm that's happening. And that's because we're focused primarily in this harm care and the fairness, these two areas. And to us, it's not acceptable for the fringe members of the group, which are fringe members because the LDS Church has put them there. It's not acceptable for us to them. It's not acceptable to us for them to be harmed. But it is them. So I think this could be a key to understanding that we're not totally talking past each other in black and white terms. There is some common ground that we could find there, but there's also this very stark difference where some things are acceptable and some things aren't, and I don't know how to bridge that gap, actually.
To teach us and help us be more compassionate. But that doesn't mean, Missy, you used the word of wisdom as an example. I accept the word of wisdom. And so, yes, when I see a member of the church breaking the word of wisdom, including myself, when I gluttonously eat too much, it's not the right thing. It's not the right thing to do. And I can't say, oh, gee, I don't want you to get stressed because you're breaking the word of wisdom. It's easy to say, and Jeff, this is not a shot at you, but it's easy to say, well, gee, to be chaste is really hard, and I don't think that's an appropriate thing, and so I don't want to get hung up on this chastity stuff, so don't talk to me about chastity. Be compassionate.
Right.
Accept me in my, and I do accept you, but I don't accept that what you've done is the right thing. But I accept and love you.
So I want to ask this question then, because
so you're not going to like me.
No,
Papa,
we love you,
but
Dad.
This to me is really the heart of the matter, Dad, and everyone else. That here we are in this family. We have a connection that we'll always have, regardless of any kind of sealing, cancellation, this or that. We have this connection, and how do we exist in a relationship where we don't necessarily agree on the church that's been such an important part of all of our lives. And, how can we have discussions where we're hearing each other, we're listening, we're respecting each other, even in disagreement?
Well, isn't that what we're doing right now?
It is.
So aren't we, in fact, doing what you're asking, how can we do? We're doing it.
We're sort of doing it. We're taking baby steps towards it. But, yeah. And it's interesting for me to hear back that even 7 years ago, I was interested in how can we have these kinds of conversations in a respectful, civil way. Well, I think that the Jonathan Haidt stuff is the answer to how to do that. Maybe. I'm trying to figure out if that is or not.
And we've done it before. And no doubt we'll do it again.
Keep doing it.
If you've ever wondered how to make a rebuke kind of sound almost sort of like validation, listen to that part again.
Well, isn't that what we're doing right now?
Okay. I guess you got me there. Yeah. I shouldn't have said anything.
Well, let's end maybe on a constructive or affirming note.
Oh, we've already been doing this for almost 3 hours here on this, so let's just end right now. How about we do it a little bit like this? And I could wrap up everything that I've said, restate everything, but I've already done that a ton. So if this was an annoying episode for you guys to listen to, apologies, but I don't know, I had fun making it, and that's kind of what this is all about. And I think I've learned something I never knew, that I never, and maybe even still don't.
In the land of the giants.
Hi, this is Lincoln from Marin County, California, and I've been a lifelong employee and supporter of the California wine industry. That's always a fun one to explain to new bishops. You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com, and if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes. I did.
And you can make a donation to Infants on Thrones through PayPal if you want. Find the donate button on our website.
Rebound marriage was like 180 degrees different than my first marriage. There couldn't have been anything more different, hardly. And
and that's probably something that we need to talk about a little, but probably not a lot, right, Mom?
Yeah, that works. It could promote the CD, though.
Well, I was gonna ask.
Is the CD still a Deseret book? I mean, hey,
it is in Cedar City.
Should we ask John to use any of the hand track as bumper music for the podcast?
Oh my gosh, that would be awesome.
I spent most of my life chasing after rainbows.
He's dying. Somebody's got to tell him, Mom.
I'll tell him. Go ahead. Or you want to do it, Jeff?
No. You got it, Glenn.
So her second marriage was a guy that just was a really interesting experience. It only lasted 3 years, and
he was bipolar and a cocaine addict. Does that tell you?
Yeah.
Right. What was the first part? I heard the second part.
He was bipolar.
Oh, yeah, that's a problem.
And crack, not cocaine, crack. It's the same thing, but it's different.
Okay, well.
Thanks, Jeff.
Let's just clarify.
So during their time together, they made a Christian music CD with music that he had written when he was in prison. And
awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And
it's a great story.
And he sounds like a Muppet. And when the CD came out, we teased her mercifully about it, and it wasn't
mercilessly.
Oh,
yes.
mercilessly about it.
Yes.
Oh no, I was merciful.
No, you weren't.
No, you should have seen what I was really thinking.
To your face, yeah.
As I stand here at the canyon's edge and I marvel at the sight, I'm sure from the beginning she put up a valiant fight to save all that was hers was her intention from the start. But the river came relentlessly and it tore right at her heart. Her peers stood by and mourned the loss of all her precious soil. As the waters washed both day and night with their never-ending toil. Okay, and I think this is probably my favorite syntactical rhyming scheme that he has. But those who come to see her now, a masterpiece is seen. Right? Isn't that awesome? The seventh wonder of the world. Ready for it? Magnificent and sheen.
But those who come to see her now, a masterpiece is seen. A seventh wonder of the world. Magnificent and sheen. Magnificent and sheen. The sculptor's hand.
It's about the Grand Canyon. It's about how God made the Grand Canyon.
To the sculptor's hand, though she did not understand.
She didn't understand. Why was God making the Grand Canyon out of
She put her trust in the sculptor.
But she trusted. That's the key here. Trust the people with the knives they'll make a canyon out of you. I don't know.
The Colorado River was the carving knife he used. The sculptor knew the river's strength and he used it as his tool. The waters tore into her heart, they never stopped to rest. Her willingness to let him carve. Became her greatest test. The sculptor's hand.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.